I like that you don't try to throw your beliefs onto other people, that you have your beliefs and you recognize them, but you're saying this is here, and it's something that I'm sure if someone was wanting to talk to you about it, you probably would. But it's not something that you're going to try to shove down their throats. And I think that that's wrong for almost any belief, trying to shove them down like someone else's throats and not letting other people have autonomy in like their decisions and the way that they want to make their decisions. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Minds of Media. My name is Blake Panashevitz, and today's guest is someone I'm really excited to have on the show. He comes from Australia, has a mechanical and aerospace engineering degree, is a wonderful caster, and now a cast member on Castles, a great D&D show. Castles and Casters, a great D&D show. Please let me introduce Mitch, maybe better known as Uber. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you very much for having me, Blake. Yes,
Yeah.
I guess all those things are true, although I don't know how notable some of them are as opposed to others. But yeah, that's me. I'm glad to be on the show, bro.
I mean, I made them sound good, right? That's all that really matters.
You did. That's why I was like, I'm not so sure that's such a notable achievement, but the way you said it kind of even commits me. So well done.
I think that, I mean, that's a very interesting take almost right there. I'm really happy to have you on the show. I think this is going to be fun. But even like the idea of like your achievements not being that big of a deal, I mean, I think that's almost something in itself. That's a very humbling opinion to kind of have, saying that, oh, these aren't a big deal. When in actuality, if you look at like casting almost in itself, you're one of the top 1% of people who get to do this in the world, maybe.
Yeah.
That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, but like it's much easier to ascribe it to dumb luck, at least in large part, than to any sort of individual prowess. If I look back over the milestones of my career, I can identify multiple occasions in which divine intervention level good fortune befell me, more so than me just being good at what I do. So
maybe. So I'm going to start it off easy with you, because with the questions, and we're going to delve into some of that philosophy and thinking, I think, because I really want to kind of get into that. So you've had some really interesting careers in your life. Okay, having looked through some of them, one of them was a fine wine consultant.
Yeah.
What the hell is a fine wine consultant?
To be fair, like if it's like when you make a LinkedIn account, you have to make stuff sound a little bit better than it is. Like I don't think there is anyone who doesn't fluff up the language. And I remember I went back over my LinkedIn page recently and I was like, wow, I really was verbose in some of these descriptions. But yeah, So it started, I worked at a liquor store when I was 16, but I was collecting trolleys. So my job for 2 years was to run around the shopping mall, the external area of the shopping mall that this place was sort of annexed to, and I would collect the trolleys and I'd bring them back. I did that for 2 years. Eventually I worked on the sales floor and stuff like that, but I was always fairly interested in wine, and as soon as I was old enough to consume it legally, I started to enjoy it quite a lot. So there was not, I mean, at the store there was like an old bloke who ran the fine wine area, and like the sort of premise of the store was that a good half of it was dedicated to great wines, because it's from South Australia, where wine is a sort of a big deal over there. So
really?
I started working under him as an assistant and got a decent education about fine wine and went out to a bunch of tastings and stuff like that. And I was quite young, so you turn up to a fine wine tasting, you're 18, and these like 50, 60-year-olds are like, what the fuck is this guy doing here? Like, who sent this guy? So I had to fight through a little bit of that, which is fair, because in reality, I didn't really know a lot about it at all. I was very like a salt of the earth kind of fine wine enthusiast. You know, like I enjoyed stuff that like obviously I didn't want to spend hundreds and hundreds of dollars. What really excited me was finding really good value wine. And in South Australia, there is just an unbelievable amount of great wine that's really cheap. So, it wasn't that hard a job in that regard.
So give me like a wine rundown. Let's say I've never drank wine before. Like, what should I be looking for in like a good wine?
Yeah, I mean, things that I really go for is, like I like a lot of flavor. I like a wine that is quite bold. So I don't drink a lot of things like Merlot or like maybe Pinot Grigio either. Those wines are a little bit more easy drinking. Maybe better as an accompaniment. I would prefer to drink a wine that speaks quite strongly on its own. So, I mean, some can do both, you know what I mean? So I love Shiraz, or Syrah, it's called out here, because it's a standalone wine. It's got a heck of a lot of character, a lot of strong, ripe fruits on the attack. And, a good Shiraz also has almost like a chocolatey or cocoa finish, depending if it's from like a cooler climate region, which I really enjoy. A lot of Aussie Shiraz is incredibly rustic. It's the kind of thing that reminds you of like, grilled chorizo on the barbecue, or sausages out there between two pieces of bread and ketchup on them. That kind of thing that I really enjoy. But by the same token, my favorite wine variety comes from an area in northern Italy. It's a Nebbiolo grape, but it's called Barolo because of the region it's from. That's pretty expensive, but it's a very, very good accompaniment to red meats, of which my diet consists primarily of. So I really enjoy that, but it gets too expensive for me. Like Italian red gets kind of out of hand. But yeah, a good Barolo is something that I really love. But I'm all about like plenty of fruits and like kind of like a quirky finish. Like if you give me some chocolate, or if you give me some like cassis on the finish, or if it feels, if there's an astringency in the mouth or something like that, like I really enjoy wines with that kind of character. I'm not really one for subtlety.
Okay. Is that like part of your personality too? Like this idea of not wanting one for subtlety? Because you are someone who's kind of out there, and it's just a noticeable comparison almost.
Yeah, I think so. I think like I guess if I'm going to eat a food or something like that, I prefer something I don't want to have something that's neither here nor there. You know what I mean? I like to eat something with character. This is also why I really love Cajun style food. Like a lot of things about Louisiana and New Orleans, especially their football team. But like that kind of food makes me quite happy. So, in a recent trip to Vietnam, I got to experience a lot of that kind of food over there. And it was definitely a highlight for me because they don't pull any punches with their food out there. Some of the stuff is incredibly pungent. Some of the stuff is, spicy or very flavorful. There's no room for subtlety or no middle ground out there for them. And perhaps that speaks a little bit to me as a person. I wouldn't say that I'm hugely subtle, perhaps bordering sometimes on lacking some awareness. But that's just who I am, bro.
So there's a really cool food you should check out when you go to Houston. It's called Viet Cajun, and it's actually a mixture of Cajun food and Vietnam food. It's supposed to be incredible.
And that one makes sense, yeah. Because obviously Vietnamese and French fusion is really quite common. Although not so much in Ho Chi Minh City. I tried a little bit of it, but yeah, so that is now like tripling down because you have the French influence in the Cajun region plus the Vietnamese food. That's like 4D chess. I'd try that.
Yeah, it's supposed to be amazingly delicious and a lot of fun. So you said you grew up in southern Australia, right?
Yeah, I mean, I was born in the eastern states of Australia, which is a little bit more like your California, I suppose. More. The weather was not as dry and more tropical, but it was very, a lot of beaches and it was quite warm. My father was a professional Australian footballer. Yeah. So he played until I was probably about 5 or 6 years old before retiring, riddled with injuries. But yes, I lived in the eastern states until I was 10, and then we moved to South Australia.
What did your mom do then?
So my mother she's worked in insurance for quite some time. So she was working quite high up for a company called Club Marine, whose job was essentially to ensure the plethora of marine vessels that existed, especially in the eastern states. It was think Newport Beach, right? Like all the rich people, not that we were, but a lot of rich people out there had their yachts and they had, they had to be insured. So my mother was like a regional manager for that area. She's always worked in insurance. And then when we left the eastern states, my parents divorced, and my mother continued to work on marine craft insurance in South Australia after that. And I think she still now works in insurance. That's all that she's ever known. And it's crazy. I don't really understand things like that. I'm not really very commerce or minded. But she's always helped me out with getting decent premiums here and there. So yeah, I've been thankful for that.
That's good, because insurance is a nightmare and it's terrifying to deal with, especially if you're in the United States. Just throwing that out there. So
I draw the line at renters and insurance and travel insurance. I have expatriate health insurance. So my health insurance provided by an Australian company that is valid out here, because I don't want to really try and traverse the quagmire that is American insurance.
Yeah, it's terrifying to say the least. So, you mentioned that your dad played professional soccer. Is that what football?
No, Australian football. So think of
okay. What is Australian football comparative to soccer and American football?
Okay, so you can't throw the ball in Australian football. The only way you can dispose of the ball is by kicking it. So by punting it, like you would, after someone scores a touchdown in the NFL, except you have to drop it to the ground and then it bounces up and then you kick it. So it's a drop punt. It's not kicked from a little cone. And no one sits there with their finger on it. So that is quite a technical kick in and of itself. But the ball is an oval. And Australian football doesn't know how to bounce it straight back to themselves. And there's a lot of bouncing of the ball that is required. The other way to dispose of the ball is to punch it out of your hand with your knuckle. It's called a handball. You cannot throw the ball, or it's a penalty. Very complicated. I encourage anyone to go and look up, AFL highlights on YouTube and try and understand it, because it almost has a Quidditch-esque element where we have 4 goalposts at either end of the field. You get 6 points for kicking it through the middle sticks, and then you get 1 point for kicking it through the left and right sets. So quite complicated. It's a hard running game with very little protection and padding, and the field is gigantic.
Okay. That sounds very interesting. And like Quidditch, that was like a perfect analogy to describe what that kind of is. So you mentioned your dad did this until you were right around 5?
Yeah, I would say he probably retired in 95, 96. But I think the prime of his career was probably from 1987 to 1991. So he'd had a decent run by then, and obviously sustained. It's a very rough game. Yeah. So he sustained obviously a lot of back injuries, especially from playing.
Mm-hmm. So looking at being a professional Australian football player, is that comparable to like an NFL professional player or an esport? Like as far as like what the like notoriety and everything is like, is it comparable?
Not back then. Nowadays, it absolutely is. I think it's a lot less it was a lot less lucrative in the late 80s and early 90s. Although, I would be lying if I said that we didn't live pretty comfortably, from that. But it was still fairly fledgling. It was a sport that was constrained to the southeast of the country in Victoria mostly. And it was only really played there and in South Australia as well. But it was only, I don't know, it was probably sort of 70s, 80s before, it actually expanded out of a single state. Remember, like Australia was only federated in the year 1901. So, up until that point, it wasn't sort of its own entity necessarily. So yeah, it's still a fairly new sport. It's kind of crazy because I've grown up with it all my life, but it isn't the kind of like, $12 million over 3 years kind of contract that we get, even for the NFL. So I would say players are getting, $1 million a year in some senses out there, but broadcast rights and endorsements, not nearly at the same level. It's not a global sport. It is huge in Australia. We get, hundreds of thousands of people that, turn up to these games. Back in the day, especially, the stadiums are larger than a lot of your American football stadiums just because of the size of the field, but also there's plenty of room for crowds and they often fill up.
Really? So I've heard Australian crowds are kind of insane. Like they're really hype. Is that a true statement? Like, I mean, you've seen all different sorts of crowds now. Do you think it's one of the more hype crowds?
Yeah, I didn't really think about it until I had sat in other crowds, to be honest, around the world. I think Bundesliga in Germany and Premier League in the UK still are pretty insane. But yeah, by and large, our crowds are pretty rowdy. I just didn't really think we were until I sat with other ones. That's probably also why Australian esports crowds are the way they are. It's not because they feel like they have a responsibility to uphold their reputation. It's just that their baseline of behaviour is just a little bit more trending towards degenerate than in other countries.
Yeah. What do you think about like the esports crowds in America? Because you've been working in America mostly for like 2 years now, and you've got to see all sorts of different crowds. I know that there's times where it doesn't feel nearly as hype as what I've seen on like the French crowds. The French crowds are kind of insane. And like especially like maybe Burbank isn't a good example. Maybe the finals are a better example. Like, is it comparable to like a finals in Overwatch League to like a major game for Australian football?
Well, what I can say about it, especially about Overwatch fans, is that there is far less I feel like they're far less subject to the sort of ebb and flow or the wax and wane of their teams. I think there's something I kind of like about Overwatch fans is that there's a general love of the game and also love of players, like sort of transcends team boundaries. So when you get like a grand final in New York, and New York are not playing in it, even though we're supposed to be playing in it, and Philly all of a sudden is playing in their hometown, you still get people that turn up, you still get people that make a ton of noise. Something I've found, or something that always struck me very deeply, is in Katowice in Poland, is that whenever Virtus Pro or a Polish team got knocked out, the place was dead. People would just get out of there. I think there's very strong, because I guess CS is, you could say it's probably a bit more international, especially as far as Europe is concerned, than maybe Overwatch is right now, in terms of nationalistic tendencies towards certain countries. Whereas the World Cup, for example, South Korea gets eliminated, China and the US in the final, a lot of different fans from different places in the arena, but it's always been allowed regardless of sort of who's playing. Last year, South Korea versus China, was still a hyped crowd. So I think Australian football, I think Philadelphia Eagles fans.
Okay.
Except slightly less. I don't think they're as violent. I think our police are a little bit more iron-fisted when it comes to our sporting events. And I also think a lot of these outpourings from fans in Australia are based on jest as well, and perhaps some of the threats. I'll be honest. I was ejected from a football stadium once in Australia, so I have. It was actually a soccer game though. Apparently, returning a thrown flare to the other crowd warrants me getting removed. So I was a big soccer fan growing up. I had a lot of friends who were first and second generation European migrants. I technically am as well. My mother is fully Hungarian by blood. So like in South Australia, there's a big football crowd. But yeah, we got a little bit carried away, and the Melbourne Victory fans threw the flare at us, and I picked it up and I held it right back at them, and I was the one that got caught.
Yeah, sometimes that's how it works. So wait, your mom is from, you said Hungary?
She's born in Australia, yeah, but her parents are both Hungarian who came over during the Second World War.
Oh, wow.
Hungary was much like Poland, was unfortunately caught right in between was it the Second World War? Yeah, they were caught between Germany and Russia, essentially. And both countries at different times occupied Hungary, and both countries, I would say, didn't really treat the people that well. So they managed to flee and come to Australia. So they probably arrived not that long after the war.
Oh, that's cool. My great-grandfather, actually, same reason, World War II, moved over to the States because of same thing. So it's just interesting to always see. So kind of looking at your growing up at the age of like 5 or 6, you end up moving from Eastern Australia, right?
Yes. Well, I was about, my dad retired when I was 5 or 6, but I was about 10 when we moved.
Okay. At what point did your parents end up separating?
It was actually when we moved over. I think my father, I don't want to take words out of his mouth, but I would say, after his football career and sort of adjusting to the fact that, there was a family that, maybe, I don't know if he was really what he had hoped for, for that phase of his life. And I know he, he always loved my mother, and he still does, and they are on very good terms. And I believe the way in which the divorce occurred was, as far as they go, quite amiable. It's just not what he wanted. Which is a bit tough as a kid growing up and sort of knowing that wasn't really where your dad wanted to be. But when we moved to it was a small country town that we ended up moving to, a town called Port Lincoln on the Eyre Peninsula. So essentially there's some jagged tooth like peninsulas at the bottom of Australia, where it looks like someone's taking a bite out of it. Yeah, more towards the right hand side. It's close to Adelaide, which is the capital of South Australia. As the crow flies, it's about 40 minutes by plane, but it's about 9.5 hours to drive because you need to drive up a jagged tooth peninsula and back down. So 15,000 people or so lived in Port Lincoln, and it just so happened that my dad decided that he wasn't going to come with us. So it was just sort of the three of us. I was
going to ask you, do you have any brothers or sisters then? Because you mentioned 3 of us.
Yeah, I do. I have a younger brother. We are, by some act of God, 11 months apart in age.
Huh. Yes, some act of God. I like how you say some act of God.
Oh, some could say that my conception was immaculate. I don't know about my brothers, but Yeah, so we were very close together in age, and always incredibly competitive growing up as a result.
So my parents divorced right when I was probably like 6 or 7, and my divorce that happened with me was not very amicable, nice at all. It was terrible. What was it like for you though as a kid? Because there's lots of kids out there who this is a very common thing now. Divorces, like the divorce rates in the United States are like 60% plus.
Sure.
And so it's pretty. How did you kind of like handle it? What was it like for you? So maybe someone else could kind of relate to that and be like, oh, look at Mitch. Mitch went on to do great things with his life.
Sure. I mean, the thing is that like, you know, the reason why I say it wasn't really that bad a breakup was because he just was there and then he wasn't, and that was it. You know, there was no like plate throwing or, you know, tantrums or huge arguments. He was just gone. It was not there anymore. So I'd say a lot of the difficulty came in having to sort of adjust to that. I think Dad was the primary, you know, the discipline provider in the household. And Mum, who, you know, at multiple points over her life suffered with sort of thyroid disease, you know, spent a lot of time at home and did a lot of, you know, raising myself and my brother. So we had to adjust a lot. I think we all slept in the same room for about 3 months, just, you know, because obviously we, you know, were leaning on each other a hell of a lot. And for me, it was kind of hard because I had to grow up pretty fast, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
The tricky part is that like as a child, I had minimal discipline. I was not motivated. I was very lazy. You know, like I look back now and I think, man, if I just stuck to this thing or that karate class or the soccer team that I was on when I was a kid, I could have done so much more, but that just wasn't who I was. And, you know, much to the frustration of my dad, I was just not, you know, I didn't really care that much about anything except watching Dragon Ball Z on Cartoon Network in the afternoon. It was just so I was very introverted. I read a lot of books and was not popular. I didn't talk to people at all. I would, you know, I'm sure my parents definitely wondered, you know, whether I had a learning disability when I was young. I was definitely pretty poorly behaved in school. It so happened that, you know, one specialist identified that I was probably just a bit bored. I was pretty bright, but just had no social skills to speak of. So growing up like that, and so you move out to a country town, right, where things are very different. I grew up in the you know, in a city of 4 million people, so going to this place was tough. It was an odd town because it was a country town, but it had the highest concentration of multimillionaires in the Southern Hemisphere per capita, because it is a tuna farming town, and the Japanese just spew money into that part of the world because that's where a lot of their finest tuna comes from. In Port Lincoln, they farm tuna in these large rings. They drag these rings out into the ocean, they put the tuna in there, and then they slowly bring them back when it's time to harvest, like when they harvest the tuna. So it's absolutely a lucrative business. My stepfather was a captain of one of the boats that, or he was, now he lectures about it, but he was involved in that industry. So I had to somehow I had to go to a new school where I already had like god awful people skills. And like these country kids were pretty switched on, you know what I mean? Like they'd had like, I'd say pretty pragmatic upbringings. Like they kind of understood how to interact with one another. So, you know, I had to, you know, without a father around as well, and I would say a fairly formative period of my life to give me, you know, a lot of their guidance, even in things like controlling your anger or, you know, how to constructively sort of work through, you know, emotions that all young boys have growing up. My mother had to try and do that for him, you know, which is obviously a very, very difficult job with two young boys that are just starting to go through puberty and grow up. So credit to her, but it was super brutal. Yeah, honestly, I'll be honest. I was there for 7 years. I was fourth grade. I would say fourth grade to 11th grade, and you know, I had some friends, but by and large, it was a fairly difficult period because I didn't ever really fit in. I never really got it until I left.
So that you mentioned not getting it. What was school like for you then? Like going through like the motions of school every day, right? Like what did it kind of look like for you? So,
you know, we would, you know, head off to school at 8 a.m. and I was sort of, I would not say that I was in shape. I had a sweet tooth and I didn't like sports. So when I was a kid, I was, you know, fairly round. My clothes were baggy, didn't fit me very well. I had bad acne, awful teeth and thick glasses. So just like the trifecta of struggles in puberty that I was sort of dealing with. Eventually, I got braces, contact lenses, got my skin cleared up. These are all things that passed. But and like I had a couple of friends, but I think I was very easy to. I was very naive. I was very trusting of the people around me. It made me a really easy target, I think, for a lot of ridicule. Mm-hmm. And I also, when I realized I was being ridiculed, I would lose my temper and lash out. And it was a cycle that I was kept in for a long time by my older, or because I was you understand, I was on the much younger edge of the spectrum in terms of my grade, because in Queensland you go straight to school when you're 5. In South Australia you have a year of prep, or like 1 year before you go into first year. So it turned out they didn't bring me up or down a year, but I was technically younger than everybody in my grade, which makes a huge difference when you're that age. So yeah, I was just a really easy target. I had a couple of friends, that sort of tolerated me, and eventually managed to, it was always a small group, and the teachers probably didn't really know quite how to deal with me. They were all country sorts, right? So they were all those like, oh, just walk it off, son, or man up, or, what I mean? So I definitely dkind of had anyone that could give me a lot of insight on how to deal with emotions or deal with being bullied, as I ultimately was for quite some time. I kind of just had to figure that out myself. And my father ended up, after a few years, he actually ended up moving to Port Lincoln himself because he realized that he wanted to be closer to us. But, by that point, like it's pretty hard to pick up where you left off. And I was still struggling a lot. I would say not until I was about 15, 16. I started to clue up a little bit more, but I mean, the amount of fights that I ended up getting into as a kid just because I didn't know how to control my anger or wasn't able to identify when people were trying to wind me up was pretty bad. And so I was seen by teachers as the problem student, or as the overly aggressive one, or one didn't know how to control his anger. And I didn't start any of these fights, but fortunately, despite being younger, I was a little bit bigger than a few kids in my year, so I never really suffered a crushing defeat in the schoolyard, as it were. But that because of that made me always the villain in these scenarios, because I was just I wasn't smarter than everyone else, but I was a lot more aggressive. So I got into a lot of trouble like that.
So does that, I take it, did you ever get like expelled from school or kicked out from school then?
No, I definitely suffered detention on multiple occasions. This is country school, so it'd take a lot to get you expelled from it. A couple fights here and there, and a couple blow-ups, and screaming matches with teachers. Unfortunately, one of my teachers, I may have belted her son at one point, but he was, he honestly, he was trying to fire me up, and he knew how to fire me up because he started talking about my father, and I just gave him one. And so that was a very strained year in 9th year, because his mother was my homeroom teacher. Not ideal.
Yeah, not ideal. So when does that start to change around, and how does that start to change around? Did you have someone come into your life who was really beneficial to help you teach you like some of these skills? Or was it just a matter of, I need to like almost learn that this isn't the way that I can act, otherwise I'm going to have long-standing consequences in life?
Well, I think, you're right. I think anyone who probably stayed at that school, it was probably not heading for an illustrious career. Look, the school was fine. It was a Catholic school that a lot of people would go on and learn trades like electricians or plumbers or builders or whatever. That obviously wasn't what I wanted, and I realized that pretty quickly. So my cousin, who was a year older than me and someone I was also quite close with growing up, started going to a school. He struggled a lot through his schooling for different reasons. Unfortunately, his biological father had passed away when he was very, very young. So, he had his own struggles, growing up, and he had recently transferred to a school in Adelaide. So that was 8 hours by car away, but quite close. It's the capital city of that state, South Australia. A school that was technically an annex of a university, and it was a science and mathematics specialist school designed to give students entering university a leg up in terms of like being in the university environment already and benefiting from like a similar structure in terms of curriculum and sort of lessons. So I said to my mother, I want to go to the school. I don't want to be here anymore in the country. I don't see myself going anywhere. And she, credit to her, this meant that I'd be leaving home, and I'd be leaving her and my brother. So she agreed to let me apply. They accepted, and like it was a public school as well. So it wasn't this really ridiculous, expensive preparatory institution like my brother ended up going to. This was just a public school where you didn't wear a uniform, which in Australia was very uncommon. You almost always wear uniforms in Australia at public or private schools. This place I just wore a name badge. I could wear whatever I wanted, and I would call the teachers by their first names as they preferred it. So I went there. I travelled to Adelaide. I tried to drive my beat-up little sort of sedan. It's like a Wrangler. It was like a really old, shitty Wrangler.
Okay.
But with like 2 doors. Trying to drive it from Portland to Adelaide. I had 3 critical malfunctions in the vehicle. One was a split radiator hose. One, I'm pretty sure the muffler pipe just broke. The other one was a cracked engine head. So it was not built for the trip. But we got there in the end. And I ended up living in a small granny flat at the back of my grandma and grandpa's house in Adelaide. They had the space there, and my mother essentially, difficult for her, I'm sure, handed over my quote unquote care to my grandparents, although they were not, they were not too intrusive. I sort of did my thing. They fed me though, and I think that was pretty handy because I wouldn't have known how to cook at that age. So very fortunate. So I started going to this science and mathematics school. It was called the Australian Science and Mathematics School, so I'm not really embellishing on it. And things definitely started to change there for me because I had the chance to reinvent myself. I think, at this country school, it was just very, very hard to live down the things you did 2, 3, 4 years ago and the things you said and the way you behaved. And people already have very much this idea of who you are that can't really be shifted. So even were you to try and turn over a new leaf or be someone else, like you would be reminded sometimes maliciously by people about the person that they thought you were. So tough to break that cycle. But going to this school, the people there were much more like me, and I realized that I was not really alone in being the kind of person I was. I mean, maybe a little bit weird, a little bit left of center, more interested in reading books or into science, and because the problem is that at this country school, it was considered cool to put the minimum amount of effort into everything that you did.
Yeah, I know. Cool. I went to a small school that was very much like that too, where there was not very many students, and it was like, if you're the one trying and you're the one doing well, then you're also the one who is like the loser. Yeah.
So this school was different. Everyone wanted to achieve because they wanted a future for themselves at university, and obviously, like your university entry in Australia depends on your score that you are given at the end of your final year exams in year 12. So, this was a school it was a senior school, so year 10, 11, 12, or was it? No, 11 and 12, sorry. And it was designed to give you the best shot and to educate you in the best way possible so you can get the best score and get the best degree. So I got to reinvent myself. I turned out to be this. I dyed my hair blonde. Don't really know why. It looked awful. And I popped my collars on my fucking polo shirts. And I was maybe overcompensating for a lack of confidence in my younger years, but I was still accepted somehow by a large group of people. And I managed to sort of find my place much easier there, and I had a much easier time making friends than I did in the country. So that was when I started to gain a confidence back.
Did you know what you wanted to reinvent yourself as? Like, did you go in there and be like, okay, this is a new place. This is the type of person I'm going to be?
Didn't even think about it. Honestly, like when I went there, it was not premeditated, this reinvention of oneself. But the reality is maybe that's who I had become, but didn't have the chance to sort of be that person because I was obviously impacted by the expectations of who I was being imposed on me by others. You know what I mean? It's going to be kind of hard to escape that. So no, I didn't really think about reinventing myself because I think at the end of the day, you're faking it unless you're just sort of, you're just sort of being who you are. But at that time, I was a musician, which obviously helped. That was a common ground that I had with, a lot of people. I loved video games. This was the kind of school that you wanted to be. If a lot of people there liked video games. I was interested in academia. I still loved playing soccer. It was not an athletically centered school. So coming from the country and playing soccer out there was enough to nab me the captainship of the school soccer team for 2 years. So I don't know how I went from being the ostracized nerd to sports team captain, but that happened. Yeah.
Interesting. Something I wanted to ask you, you mentioned that you didn't really like sports kind of growing up that much earlier on. That it wasn't like that huge because you mentioned being overweight and not taking care of yourself. Do you ever think that was a little bit weird, considering that your dad was literally a professional sports player?
Yeah. But, yes. You know what though? Like it wasn't me lashing out at him or whatever. It wasn't like my father never pushed me to try and to be a sports person. He pushed me to try everything.
Yeah.
But like he was trying to help me with my hand-eye coordination. We'd just throw the ball to each other in the backyard and stuff like that. Classic dad and son stuff. But my problem is that it was weird, but I, as a person, I lacked the character qualities of. I didn't understand what the point of persisting at something was. I didn't understand what the fruits of determination or like self or motivation were, because I had not seen them manifest in my life prior. Like I think the first time that someone discovers the fruits of labor, so to speak, they have to just trust or hope that they exist without really knowing, even if they see it around
100%.
them. So it just took me a long time to embark on a journey that took effort and to believe in the or trust in the process, to use the oft overused adage.
What was your like light bulb moment where that came then? What was the point where that whole thing started to shift and you actually were like, okay, we need to try on these things because you do get something out of it?
I think it was in my music studies, actually. I started as a saxophone player when I was younger, and I started as a piano player, and I rage quit after a year because my mother was definitely forcing me to do that, and she definitely was keeping me in that. I did not want to do it. My brother, ironically, went on to become a master's level piano player, very, very good. But I didn't want to do that. So I picked up a saxophone because I thought it was cool. It looked cool. It was shiny. I like shiny things. So I played that for a while and got okay. It wasn't until I picked up the bass guitar that I actually started to realize I might have had a bit of an aptitude for it. This is a great situation because it was the process of playing and learning was rewarding enough in itself without me having to manifest that into an end goal or like a singular moment, I think, where you realize it was worth it. I just kind of enjoyed it. So, as a kid, I had to find something like that I enjoyed that also had a huge payoff, right? Watching cartoons was not that thing. I managed to really sort of rise up the ranks, especially in our school of bass players, and was probably one of the youngest to be sort of in our main percussion and stage band ensembles. And I was pushing ahead quite far in my individual studies with my teacher, and in our music class when we had to do recitals like every term to prove that we'd done something. Like I was starting to play some music that was definitely well out of what you'd expect from someone my age. So that was definitely where I started to realize that I was getting somewhere. But it took something that I had to enjoy organically on its own before I realized how worth it was. And that, by the way, is a huge foreshadowing of my career.
I believe that, and that's kind of why I wanted to get into that. I do want to ask you one more question about music because I also play music. I actually play guitar, and I was going to be a music education teacher at one point until my teacher told me not to. So feels bad, man. But looking at that, what type of music do you enjoy playing? Like, do you still play now? Is there like a music that you really gravitate towards?
Yeah. Yes. I think my theory knowledge, unfortunately, is really weak nowadays, and I kind of petered out before I really started to understand how to use modes correctly. Which for a musician, understanding modes is very important for improvisation, and being able to actually solo properly, or not being stuck in a pentatonic or blues scale, which as a guitarist is super limiting, right? You stay in one position, you don't move, and you got like 7 notes to work with. It's not enough. And so fortunately, like my improvisation is still bad, but I really enjoyed playing along to a lot of the Red Hot Chili Peppers songs. Any bands that really had bass as a slightly more forward-facing instrument, Jaco Pastorius, Marcus Miller, Victor Wooten, a lot of the old and great bass players of their day, their songs are still ones that I work on now. I'm still trying to work on You Can't Hold No Groove by Victor Wooten and understand some of the percussive. The problem is that Victor is really not a technically minded bass player. He talks about music being a language, and just feel it, bro. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not going to give you any music. Just kind of play what feels right. I'm like, everyone's got a different way of playing my song. I'm like, yeah, but I want to know how you play the song, Victor. I want to play it like you do. But I think that's I'm actually missing the point with that kind of thing. So, I play a lot of funk in general. blues we played. I mean, my music career, it wasn't a career, but my whole experience of music was built on a 12-bar blues chord progression. That's me and my brother were picking up the bass and guitar respectively at about the same time. So we would spend a lot of time just playing 12 bars or a very standard chord progression, and he would just solo over it, and I'd try and throw licks in between some of the phrases to link them up. And a friend of ours was the drummer, and yeah, so definitely like blues and funk are probably my main motivations, I guess, in music. Okay. Yeah, one of my main influences. There you go.
Yeah, influences, I think, or like genres that you enjoy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that is wild and awesome, and I like it when I find people who play music, because music is amazing. So, one other thing is that you're playing D&D now. Did you play D&D growing up as a kid?
Never. Not once. In fact, the concept of a role-playing game was so foreign to me. When I lived in Adelaide, I was probably about 17, 18. My cousin was definitely into that kind of stuff. And we played a Warhammer-based tabletop campaign called Dark Heresy. It's a D100 based. I love the Warhammer world, especially like mostly the fantasy Warhammer world, because I'm a huge High Elves fan, but I also loved 40k a lot. So I loved a lot of the Black Library books, the Inquisitor novels and stuff like that. So we played a Dark Heresy campaign where like my cousin was an Inquisitor, I was like his gruff bodyguard. I always end up playing like these meathead type characters in a lot of these games. Which, considering my background, is a bit odd, but I guess I just enjoyed it a bit more. So I played that then, but my return to D&D wasn't until I was maybe last year. But I picked up a game with Ashley, my girlfriend, plays quite a lot of D&D, and so she was like, "Oh, my friend wants to play a D&D campaign, a short one based on Magic the Gathering," which is something I play a huge amount of. I used to sort of try and play competitively quite a while ago, and still play casually now. So I did it. It was kind of fun. A little bit of my theatrics from being a caster kind of played into it. And then, the Casters and Castles opportunity came up. I thought, none of it's really, except with the exception, I guess, in that campaign of Ashley, were in that first arc, were familiar with the game. So Ashley obviously, was able to navigate us through a very complex campaign. But a lot of us just weren't really sure on how it worked. We also were playing one with Doa once a week as well, off stream, or we just go to his place and we play like a different campaign where, shock horror, I was still the same Aasimar fighter.
Do you think you gravitate towards that? Is there like a reason you gravitate towards that?
Yeah, I love angels, bro. I like the wings and the halos and the flaming swords. I just think the motif is just kind of sick. It's also kind of why I played High Elves in Warhammer, because their armor was very polished and shiny, blue, white, and blue and white with like gold trims was like their color scheme. So I very strongly gravitate to the concept of good over the concept of evil, I guess, which is a little bit cliche, but angels and shit like that is kind of my jam. So, for example, I was a Kayle main in League of Legends for a long time. However, it was not enough to get me to be a Mercy main. Let me be clear on that one. I avoid that if I can. But I'm all about that shit, man. Like angels and like heavenly bodies and stuff. It's just kind of cool. I just enjoy it, especially a lot of the artist representations of them.
Are you religious? Because I know that you mentioned going to a private Catholic school, I think. Are you religious yourself?
If I did not end up being an engineer, I would have gone to Bible school.
Really?
This is I may have glossed over this one a little bit here, but I mean my beginnings with the church started when I was a kid, and I was baptized as a Catholic, and I think my mother took us to church because she believed it was the right thing to do. She sent us to Catholic school because she believed that was also the right thing to do. I think my mother turned to the church for support after her marriage broke down, and I don't think that she received the help that she needed, sadly, and we stopped going. But so I met a group of people when I first went to this science and mathematics school that were Christians, and they kind of convinced me to go along with them to their youth group, and this is kind of how it always happens. But I think I was struck about the environment when I was there. This was a Baptist church, but not in like the Southern Baptist way that you guys kind of have. It was a kind of church where you can walk in like 5 minutes late. You can be wearing flip-flops. like I used to play in the band at church. I usually wouldn't wear shoes, and I'd wear like, whatever I wanted. Like it was very, very modern. The music was not, a decrepit old person playing at a pipe organ. It was a band with like two electric guitars, a drummer, like a little bit more trending towards like Hillsong Planet Shakers kind of vibe, right? So,
okay.
But it was a church that was very much about scripture, not about, speaking in tongues, miracles, Holy Spirit, all that kind of stuff. Like it was like, listen, we understand that like some religious people definitely fixate or orbit around these more supernatural experiences or feelings. We would, I think we're Calvinists. I don't really know. I don't know what the difference is in Baptist churches, but we're like, listen, we think that's kind of cool if like, but we don't do that here. Like we don't focus on it. We want to focus on what's in this book. When we read the Bible, and we're going to try and live by that. So, I became involved in the church for a while. Looking back, I believe that it was definitely much more about the feeling of belonging that had me wanting to go back. And I really, I met a lot of really important people in my life there who were able to, act as strong male role models that I frankly just did not have. At all in my upbringing. So, I was part of the church. I joined the band. I ended up being a youth leader. I was very much involved in it. What I used to do, I used to work a lot with like young people from underprivileged backgrounds, and they'd come out to a camp. They're like, the church would, try and get these kids to come out to a camp. And it wasn't like one of those indoctrination camps like that. I fucking hate that shit, man. That kind of scares me. This is the kind of camp where like, you just get them to run around all day, and and you'd spend time with them and you talk to them, and like, I'd sit with the group of these young men, and we talk about like what it means to sort of kind of be a man today, or like, how do we deal with tough times at school, or what if their father is perhaps an alcoholic, or their family life is really roughed up, and like I forged a lot of connections with young guys who now have grown up, and we've connected since, and they said like I'm really glad I was able to have someone for advice and support and a role model back then. But that's what I got out of that, being at church as well. I was in a relationship at church, and they're always a little bit interesting, right? Because there's always an expectation in Christian communities that you're probably going to get married after not too long a period of courting. Like my pastor, I think, had known his wife for 6 months, I think, before they were married. Because obviously, in Christian communities, the expectation is that you're not having sex before you get married. And I believe this might be a little bit jaded, and I say this now as someone who is not deeply involved in church anymore, but still holds a lot of the things that Christians believe is very personal beliefs that I do not project onto the world, and I do not sort of push in people's faces. But I a little jaded, but I think that like some Christians were just getting married as early as they could, so they can get on a good foot and do the bad thing, so to speak. So, but I was in a relationship, and unfortunately, as young people, I won't give too much detail, but it's very hard. Like if you're in a relationship, it's very hard to sort of deny, urges that you sort of have. So long story short, we didn't have sex, and bear in mind we're 18, 19, 20, right? So we're not we're not minors. But and then that was what broke the relationship down, because there was a guilt about how we'd sort of done this thing that was kind of taboo in church, and no one told me at the time that this was actually kind of common and it was okay, and it wasn't like you'd be fucking excommunicated for it, but like there was a reason for it, because they definitely put much more sacred emphasis on that. But I was like, well, that's it, like I'm defiled, this whole thing, so I actually sort of walked away from the church for that reason for quite some time. Luckily, and that relationship obviously ended and all that sort of stuff, which was a shame, because she was lovely. But looking back now, I realized that like it's way too easy to sort of feel this crazy internalized guilt, in these Christian communities. And I'll say this right now: it was incredibly important for me growing up to experience that. I had so many people that supported me that I would not have had otherwise. I think I learned a lot about myself. And it definitely changed the way that I view the world. It doesn't mean that and I'll make this clear, it doesn't mean that I'm like, anti-abortion and all that sort of stuff. I don't believe that Judeo-Christian values necessarily should shape politics and how the world works, because it only accounts for a very small subset of our population.
Yeah.
I do think that Judeo-Christian ethics, I believe that in the past that helped form a basis for what we now know today as modern morality. I believe that has a huge part of it, especially with like the Ten Commandments and stuff like that. Now, did it come from there? I'm not saying that, but I think it really was a big part of it, because before that, as far as we know, a lot of those ethics weren't really part of our mindset as the way that people lived, right? Like, people didn't really think twice about taking lives, or maybe they did, maybe they didn't. But my personal belief is, it was pretty important in how we understand morality.
One of the things I always say to people is I'm not religious at all. Like, no. I used to be, and growing up, and I had some bad experiences. I'm like, I don't actually need this for what I want to be as a person, which is kind of what you're taught growing up a little bit sometimes, is that you need this if you want to be a good person type of thing. I think you need to believe in something, as far as like either some value system that you need to believe in wholeheartedly. That doesn't necessarily have to be something religious, but like my value system is like trust and honesty. I always want to be as honest and trustworthy as I possibly can be, to myself first, and then to other people. So, and that's kind of what I've always held on to. And I think having a belief system is really positive in helping you grow as a person. So I have like nothing against people who I was just very curious about it, because I think that, especially when you talk about your life and not having any role models, I did know that religion at least played some role in your life. And it seems like it played a really important part, at least getting you to who you are today.
Like I said, I was, very close to becoming a youth pastor and going to Bible school. I ultimately decided not to do that for a few reasons. I also, look, it's a little bit tough. I often ask myself why as well. I go to myself like, well, what kind of happened there? And I generally think that I was definitely able to cope with a lot of the tough things in my life as a Christian, because the support network was there, but also like the way that I saw the world and the way that I perceived, things that would happen to me. I was able to sort of go, well, maybe this is supposed to happen. And saying that everything happens for a reason doesn't necessarily help. It's sort of knowing how to accept that stuff can happen and be able to look forward. So, I still to this day, this is the best way to cap off, I guess, this part of my life, because it was very formative and very important. I just don't really offer it up without prompting, but I just realized that life was maybe a little bit more complex than the Bible could account for, and that, I think that a belief system based around scripture is definitely, I prefer it over people falling over and trying to make people walk again and speaking in tongues. I just do not get around that shit at all. But, I feel like life wasn't that simple. And there were a lot of things that, I definitely agreed with. And, it suits me, Blake, to believe that there is life after death. So that when, that my friend Dennis, God rest his soul, after he passed, I know that he's still there, and I don't have to, so it almost suits me in a way to believe that. That's why it's a personal thing, and it's why I'm not evangelistic about my faith, because quite frankly, I'm a poor example of a doctrinal Christian. And secondly, I think, we have to find our own way of seeing the world and dealing with trials and tribulations in our lives, and ultimately, like, we're going to be more predisposed to certain methods of coping with that. But I know for me that, do I believe in that stuff? Yeah, because it suits me. I believe that there is a God because it suits me to believe that, but it doesn't make me walk around saying, that women shouldn't be able to choose what they do with their own bodies. I think that's where I draw the line. I
like that you don't try to throw your beliefs onto other people, that you have your beliefs and you recognize them, but you're saying this is here, and it's something that I'm sure if someone was wanting to talk to you about it, you probably would. But it's not something that you're going to try to shove down their throats. And I think that that's wrong for almost any belief, trying to shove them down like someone else's throats and not letting other people have autonomy in like their decisions and the way that they want to make their decisions, which I think is really powerful.
Yeah, because I don't think, it is a part of who I am, that religiousness, but only insofar as the way that I have interacted with it, and the way that, certain parts of it has resonated with me and certain parts just hasn't. And I have, done something that is considered rather sinful as a doctrinal Christian. It's choose which parts of the Bible that I want to live by and then reject the others. But unfortunately, or fortunately as it may be, that is how you walk through the world. You see things around you. Some things really resonate with you, and some things you really believe, and some things you disagree with. And there are tons of stuff in that book, and a lot of Christians try and say, well, look, you have to look at this in the context of the culture and the time of publication. I'm like, okay, fair enough. But like, even if I try and look at the fucking Greek translation or try and find the Rosetta Stone, opinion on this, like, it doesn't really make it any better. Like, I think there's a lot of mental gymnastics done in doctrinal or like more scripture-based Christian congregations to make what is written in the Bible sometimes more palatable. And frankly, like, I think that is just trying to put the round block in the square hole,
I 100% agree. So when did you start to be involved with the church? Was that when you moved to this new mathematics school?
That's right, because I met people at this, ironically enough, this science and mathematics school, right, which are considered fairly like secular subjects.
Yeah.
But I met a lot of people that were quite easily able to reconcile that and all wanted to have careers in science and tech, and we're still religious here. So I met these people, became friends with them, and they invited me out to their youth group.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things that I caught in one of your interviews is that you actually, later on when you went to college, ended up taking a psych test. And that psych test, I'm guessing, put you pretty high in the antisocial scale, because you mentioned being kind of comparative to a psychopath. And I'm guessing it was probably lack of conscious development was probably one of the larger aspects of that, because that's what... I also know people who have failed, who have been very close to me, and I shared similar thought patterns as those people. So I can kind of relate to that. What did that look like in your life growing up? Was it something that was always there? Did that kind of build as you kind of grew up? Like, what did it look like, this idea of not caring for other people?
Yeah, so I think it was, as I had grown up, and I think that, I kind of missed out a little bit in my developmental period. So first and foremost, I was very weak when it came to introspection. Or when you see the world, like, if you're trying to, see the world from a different perspective, a lot of people have a great difficulty actually inserting themselves into what they see, even if it is technically like you're viewing this from outside your own body. So, and this can result, I think the inability to be introspective can result in a tendency to project at all times, like disappointment or suffering or anything like that, is to project it onto other people.
Yeah.
And what I did was I underwent like a psychiatric evaluation as part of admissions for the Air Force, because Air Force was kind of cool because they would sort of pay for your university degree and you'd work 3 years in the Air Force after that, and you were sort of free. I could have gone into like private enterprise, could have worked for Boeing or Raytheon or whatever after I had that experience, because experience was what was so hard to get as an engineer in Australia, especially in aviation. And I didn't understand what leadership was. First of all, I really just thought it was just like, oh, well, listen here, I'm going to tell you guys what you do, and you're going to do it, and that's what it is. And I had, no understanding about how leadership was much more about raising a new generation or getting alongside people, coming to them where they're at and helping them find a way forward and helping them develop. So I was super underdeveloped, I think, in that sense, because when I started going to this new school, I was also living there without a whole lot of accountability from my mother, who, maybe didn't see all this behavior, and maybe I didn't show it to her when I lived with her even, but I was able to sort of decide who I wanted to be. And it was like I overcompensated for 10 years of having no confidence by having way too much confidence and just sort of thinking I was the bee's knees. And this had like tons of ramifications. In my personal life, it wasn't too bad, because I think with my friends, like I didn't alienate. It's crazy, because I would have alienated people for a completely different reason. First it was too little confidence, and then I alienated people because I had too much of it, and a ridiculous amount. So I was like, I think sociopaths struggle a lot with experiencing a great deal of remorse for what they do, but I think more importantly is that they either can't be introspective, or they can be and don't care. And I think that that's probably even worse. But
so I've actually met I've only met one person who's actually, because I used to work in when I worked in mental health, I worked in a jail system and then a treatment center. I've only met one person who I'm pretty sure is far enough on that scale to be considered what people, because people don't use to either one of those terms anymore. They got rid of them. But sociopath or psychopath, most terrifying person I've ever met in my life, by far, because they just don't care about people. Like literally, would have been willing to sacrifice their own kids to been out of jail. Like that level of, it's like terrifying. So
that's a sense of humanity that just doesn't exist, right?
Yeah, it makes you wonder, and I've always wondered this with the way our society is, and this is like extreme kind of philosophical theory. Is that the true evolutionary path for human beings in our society? Because sociopaths do really well in our capitalist society.
Well, yes. So I think about this all the time, actually, because I think, especially a lot of progressive policies, in today's day and age, are definitely more focused around, the individual. If you look at a lot of the things that, for example, Democratic candidates are campaigning on right now, like. Or Andrew Yang, or or the Medicare for all, things like that. Like these are policies that are more concerned about like the bulk of people, whereas a lot of capitalist policies are based on ability to be personally enterprising, to innovate on oneself. I think it's much more self-deterministic.
Yeah.
And so my question is, which one of those two paths is going to be the prevailing one? Because from what I see in culture and how the vast majority of people, at least those that I can see on social media, lean very heavily towards a lot more progressive personal politics, especially where it comes to like protected classes or, representation for these underrepresented, minorities or any of this stuff. Me personally, like, I wouldn't be this. My job requires me to be personally enterprising. It requires me to sort of have a personal set of skills that is not common, and I monetize that. So it is a capitalist to its very core. Whereas obviously maybe more like a socialist or say communist is the more extreme version of it, is a situation in which everyone is there's no incentive to innovate, right?
Yeah.
And so this is why I tend to agree with you, because human society, I personally don't think advances without innovation and without an advocacy for general progress. But the problem is a lot of policies on the left or on the progressive side are also to preserve the fucking planet, so there is a future for us to innovate into.
Yeah,
what I mean? Like there's innovation there as well in terms of like trying to protect the climate. But it's so funny because there's a line from the Beatitudes. I think it's Matthew chapter 12. It says that the meek will inherit the earth. And I think to myself, a lot there are, with socialized healthcare being what it is, and the vast the masses, I guess the vast majority of people being catered to with a lot of these progressive policies, is that the direction we're going in, or is it we're going to continue to push in the individual enterprise direction, based on like what capitalism? You know what I think?
Yep.
I think whether there is a large scale war in the next 50 years will decide that a lot, because politics and the personal politics of people in the world change a lot based on whether whether they're in war or peacetime. People talk about peacetime conservatism. Especially during like the wars that are past, the Second World War. The Democrats were almost the ones that were more towards the right end of the spectrum, right? Like if you look back far enough, you can actually see where the parties were in a very different minds. So this coming from a guy who has no idea about American politics, by the way, like really doesn't understand it very well. But I just wanted to respond to that query you sort of brought up, even if it was rhetorical, because it's something I think about a whole lot. Is that
it's an interesting thought.
If we can find a way to keep the world alive, I think that capitalism probably is going to be the way it goes. But I believe that capitalism, I believe, causes a lack of at some point down the line, a lack of care for the average person, right?
Yeah.
Because if you are self-deterministic and making money on your own, you are not thinking about the other people that maybe don't have the capacity or the opportunities to make that kind of money. And then there are people that because of a capitalist system are just, have this family money that they sit on, right? And didn't actually have to do that. But because someone along their line in ancestry put in the hard work and set up his family, the discussion is, do they deserve this money? Because now they're not working for it. So now like this whole idea of, what you do, you do and you get paid for it is kind of not there. But I will say that personally, I am deeply disturbed by the concept of Marxism, because I know, speaking to people in Vietnam, they said when they were under a communist system, they would all get paid the same amount no matter how much they farmed. People just stopped farming because they knew they get paid as much as their neighbor that actually put in the work.
I think you need personally, I think you need a balance between the two. Like, you don't want to go full communism because that's bad, but you also don't want to go capitalist because it is void of a lack of empathy for human beings, I think.
And and also it gets more top heavy as well. Like there will be more people with more, and then like people. Like you just get like what are you supposed to do if you didn't grow up in an area that you like gave you the chance to get the education? The problem is like, how can I tell the difference between two people that come up and say, well, I've been fucked over by the system? One of those people actually never has had those opportunities and just has been screwed over. The other one's just fucking lazy and wants handouts to do nothing. How can I tell the difference? Like I have no idea. I got lucky, bro. I grew up in middle class. I went to this science and math school. Like I got a good education. If I hadn't had that, if I'd stayed at the school in the country, maybe I'd be saying the same damn thing. Maybe I would have tried to become an electrician and my business failed in 3 months. I'd turn to drugs and I'd be, like there's so many cities like that. Like you go as far as Palmdale here north of Los Angeles. People are trapped by drug abuse and by the fact that they can't even afford to get out of Palmdale because they can't get jobs in Los Angeles that pay enough for them to live there. Like, well, it's so crazy, bro.
It is. And I think that is one of the things is like, I know that for me, I still have like some part of me is still in that business mindset. Like I see, like looking at Overwatch, I see things and there's times where other people have empathy and I just don't like, especially when it comes to like contract stuff. Like when you get into like that is like, this is your business and you really need to think about this. But if you didn't and like something happened, like my level of empathy just tends not to be there for that.
Why is that? Because you've seen that yourself, or like why do you think that, you are not empathetic where everyone else is?
I think I'm not empathetic for it because I think it's like that was completely within their control to make sure that something bad didn't happen. And a lot of times that comes down to people just not doing the work or not reaching out or not talking. And granted, it could be because they're young. Like that's a full, like that is like a logical explanation that our brains don't.
Is that an excuse though?
Your brains don't, it is kind of an excuse. I agree with that. And this is where it gets tricky with me because like I know from psychology, the brain does not stop developing till you're like 24. Okay.
I really was hoping mine would develop a little more, but
no, you're screwed. We're both screwed because we're about the same age. Yeah. So we're both screwed. You could still grow. It just grows significantly slower. But like major development of like different areas of your brain stop right around 24. Okay. That makes it interesting. Like, well, are people actually responsible for their decisions? In the United States, past 18, you are responsible legally. Yeah. Like legally past 18, you are responsible. Whether or not you actually have the brain capacity to make like when I was 18, I did some stupid ass decisions that looking back now, I'm like, wow, that was dumb. I wouldn't do that today. Now,
I look back 1 year and I make dumb ass decisions, but yeah, that's kind of brutal, right? Like imagine if you'd done something so dumb when you were 18 and then by the time you're 28, you can look back and go, oh, yes, I wouldn't have done that now if my brain was more developed. I had more wrinkles on it.
Yeah, I feel like I don't have empathy because I feel like there's been enough public knowledge about like, oh, hey, you should probably get a lawyer to look over your contract and you should. So like the public information I feel like is out there and people not doing it, I feel like is them just not looking into these resources. And so I think that's probably why I don't have the empathy for it.
I feel that. I get the same when I think when I hear people sort of tell me that they can't get their break in as casters, or they don't know what to do. I think to myself, there's never been more information or resources available to people than there is now. It all ties into I think what we were talking about opportunity versus just lack of inclination or lack of drive, and it can be hard to evaluate because it can be multiple things.
Yeah, it is very interesting. So kind of looking back at your life, this huge tangent that we kind of took there. You're going to a mathematics school. At what point do you say, I want to be an aerospace engineer?
Pretty early on. I think I was always interested in space and, and planes and all that sort of stuff as a young kid. I just found it really interesting. So I think being at that school turned it from more of like a side interest to like, oh, I can actually do a course that specializes in this. And so, and that was because of education I'd received at the university. Like they would at that school, sorry, they were like, hey, these are the kind of things you can study. I mean, if you want to study this, you need to take these subjects in your senior year because they are prerequisites. So, I ended up doing a set of subjects known colloquially as the Suicide Five because they were probably they were all the hard ones basically, but but it was just physics, chemistry, mathematics, like the standard mathematics, and then you could take specialist mathematics in senior year as well, which was more like pre-calc or like maths 101 from uni, and then English studies. We had to take an English subject either way. So English studies was much more of analyzing text, understanding sort of poetry, Shakespeare kind of stuff, whereas English communications at the time was understanding more so how advertisement works, understanding how business comms works, which I should have done that, in hindsight, but that's fine. So that's when I was, by that point, by my senior year, I was dead set on what I wanted to do at university. The course to get into it, so it's out of 100. Sorry, they're coming for me, Blake. It's all over.
Yeah, it's okay. We'll say your goodbye.
The course required a tertiary entrance rank of 99.5, and you can only get 100, mate. Like, no one could get 100. You couldn't actually get 100 because like it was basically what percentile of students. So you had to be in the 99.5th percentile in the state to get in. So it was really hard. Now, I kind of got lucky because I definitely put in the work in my senior year, but work ethic was just not something that I really had for studies. Like I had an aptitude for it. I could interface with these subjects quite easily, but my work ethic was shit. So I ended up getting like a 95. So fortunately, engineering that year dropped down to 92.75. So I still managed to get in, but I
was going to ask you, how did you get in with the?
Yeah, my brother had to get into law he scored a 99.8 in his school entrance to get into law because that was the only way it would have happened, which is absurd to me because I know what that would have required him to do in his final year. And so at this time he was at a very, very fancy school. He managed to get a scholarship to go there, and he was living at like the boarding house. So he was at boarding school essentially, but it was in Adelaide. So I would see him fairly frequently. He was across town, but I catch up with him. But he was at a preparatory academy, rowing and playing tennis with his little white dad hat on. It was like that. I mean, there's no way we could have paid for it without him getting the scholarship. Fortunately, it was a scholarship for academia. And he became quite a good rower. He was definitely the athletic one out of us, and he definitely had the work ethic that I didn't have. So that definitely served him well. But yeah, so that's when I decided, like, I wanted to sort of, do aerospace engineering. Little did I realize that Australia offshores all of our aircraft maintenance to Southeast Asian countries because it is cheaper. So anyone watching this and is thinking, yeah, exactly, right? Supply and demand, baby. Anybody who's thinking about being an aerospace engineer, just have to keep that in mind that, spots for jobs are very limited. You have to definitely be cream of the crop. I graduated with first class honors at university, and I still could not get the kind of job I wanted. I just
really
couldn't. I got pretty unlucky. Yeah, there were a lot of those situations where it's like I was guaranteed to be able to do this job, and then something catastrophic happened, not to me, but with the job, and then I don't have it. Like I was supposed to start an internship program with British Aerospace. I'm told like 3 days before that the government has got the funding to have an intern program, and I'm like, did you is that really happen, or did you just promise me something that you can't give me, and now there were like 3 different jobs that kind of happened like that, unfortunately. So I just didn't. I actually my first engineering job would have been an extension of my work experience, my work placement, but that was working for an engineering firm that mostly specialized in sort of building and designing infrastructure and piping for oil refineries. Boring as fuck. I walked in there and I had like I was pretty good at sort of CAD, computer design and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I walked in there first day and they said, "Oh no, we don't do that here." They hand me a pad of paper and a pen and go, "Draw what you want built." I'm like, are you fucking kidding me? I did that in my first year. Like I did engineering drawing. You had to be able to be a draftsman to be an engineer. But this was not something that I had to do since my first year of university. I looked at him, I said, are you kidding? He's like, yeah, the only computer we have in this place is the one where the secretary does the accounting on. You're servicing Shell and Mobil power oil refineries here in Adelaide. Like you are responsible for like building completely new fuel tanks, fuel lines, stairs, railings, platforms, all this stuff. Like, yeah, we just like sketch it out. You know, we just like ring the company up, get a quote on the materials, and we just build it. I'm like, me, this is building. Like, you know what I mean? So I was there for 6 weeks. I had to work from 6 a.m. to sort of like 4 p.m. which is fine, but it was mind-numbing. I brought my laptop. You know what I did? I watched Voyboy stream League of Legends like 4 hours a day. And that's all I did. because there was nothing for me to do. Because they didn't know how to give me stuff to do. They didn't know what to do with me because I was an engineering graduate. But all these guys had come from like just building and trade backgrounds. And this was an engineering firm. They absolutely did engineering and they were bloody good at it. But like, I don't know how I was supposed to just like see something on it and then just draw it like on a pad with a pen and then hand it to the guy. And somehow the guy made it, you know? It was one time I managed to do one good thing there and I was there for 6 weeks. Like it just half the time they just left me in the office because they didn't know what to do with me. But one good thing I identified when one of our welders had put a pipe on backwards. And I brought that to the attention of like the guy. He was like, no, there's no way. And I showed him this sheet of paper. I'm like, listen, mate, like this, all I do is look at shit. All I do is walk around and try and find something to do. Like I'm telling you, this is wrong. Saved us about 10 grand. And I think it was because of that they asked me to come back on board full time afterwards. But I thought to myself, I don't want to do this. I just got a degree and you want me to sit in this like old ass workshop and probably not have anything for me to do until what? Like it was all self-directed and that's fine because that's what university was. But I didn't like it, and I opted not to stay in hopes of finding something else. And that was the closest thing I've ever been to working as an engineer.
That's miserable.
Not nearly as impressive, right?
Did that really turn you? I mean, I've heard similar stories where people have like it's not what you expect. My girlfriend's actually an engineer. We've actually talked about this. She's a material science engineer. So it's a lot more exciting than probably that because she actually uses technology. She
actually get to do stuff. Yeah. That sounds dope. Yeah.
So, but after this experience, did you still want to work in engineering? Is it something you were still like, oh my God, this is what I want to do?
Not really. I think that, had I gotten to work on the kind of stuff that I would have wanted to work on, maybe it would have been different. But I think, it definitely wasn't what I thought it would be.
Yeah.
Like I designed a UAV drone and built it in my final year of university. We built like a medium to long range drone with like payload capacity. It was actually quite a novel piece of engineering because it was all one piece. Like it didn't have like a tail or like a fuselage. It was a flying wing design because we designed it to sort of be as efficient as possible to be launched off the back of patrol boats. That shit was fun. Like that was like, damn. We are constructing. We are building this. I carbon fiber wrapped the foam. We had to foam cut the body by hand because we didn't have the budget to get British Aerospace to cut it out of their 3D cutter mill thing. So we had to do that all ourselves. But, I realized afterwards, I was like, there maybe are some jobs like that. But first of all, we have NASA in Australia. We have a branch of NASA in Australia where a lot of the weapons tests are done. Okay, fine. No, not really that interesting. Like I said, our aviation engineers are all offshored. So, I would have been okay working for an airport doing like routine checks on aircrafts. But I think the only way that aerospace engineering in Australia would have been fun was working for the Defence Force. And well, I'd already fucking burnt that bridge by being an absolute prat. So, maybe I could have tried to go back, but who knows? I think if I'd gotten to the Air Force, it would have been much more enjoyable, but that would have been me. I would have been locked into that life. You would never see me behind a camera or behind a mic.
So you mentioned you burnt that bridge. What was that? Because I know that you did the psych testing, but you didn't. Yeah. I didn't see you go into how you burnt that bridge.
Yeah, I mean that was part of the whole thing. So I took an aptitude test, like an IQ test, fine. I said, you could do whatever you want. Like they even said you can be an officer because I wanted to be an officer. I was like, great. I think they hate officers in the defense force though. I think they're a pain in the ass, but I didn't know that. And then like I had to sort of write an essay on talking about like what I thought leadership was. Completely bombed that because I just didn't know.
Yeah.
And then I did the psych analysis, bombed the shit out of that as well. And they were like, listen, we're not interested in your grades are great. You're like, come back in a couple years, they said.
Wow.
I just don't, and I was like, I thought I was such a shoo-in that I was so embarrassed that I never tried. I never went back. And a friend of mine who I went to school with, and he never went to university, but he joined the army and ended up working as a technician on their Black Hawk aircrafts, and now is, for all intents and purposes, an aerospace engineer. Never went to uni. Wasn't a dick either, so that really helped him, I think. And now, like I think he really enjoyed the job. I think he really enjoys sort of working the forces. I think he's out now, but yeah, no. So that's how I burnt the bridge, by being an absolute turd and them not wanting to have anything to do with me.
Okay.
Fair enough.
So how does that behavior start to change with you? Because right now, if anyone met you, they would be like, there's no way that that's possible. That's not who he is. Even like me, I never knew this kind of stuff about you until I started researching into you. And I was like, interesting. He had somewhere in his life a major shift in his personality where he was more humble and he's more caring about people. Like you're one of those people who I feel like I could call if I had an issue and you would help me. Okay. So that's what I mean. It's like that's the person I know you as. Where did this shift kind of happen? Like how did you get to that?
It happens, I think, over time and over multiple things. But generally, you have to suffer. You have to suffer disappointment or setback, and you need to find a way amidst all of that to understand your part in all of it. And the thing is that like even me, one of the most like at the time like unaware people in the world, I was still trained as my education is a maths and science guy. A lot of what I learned, my education was about identifying trends and trying to draw causal links between things. So eventually, at some point, I'm like, wait a minute. I think it was definitely that interview that really started that whole thing. But I was like, oh man, because I had no idea. No one was keeping me honest, man.
Yeah.
Like if people knew I was like that, they just didn't tell me. Probably because they were afraid of me, being a twat.
Yeah.
So I, that's when it began, and I think it happened, over the next few years because I was humbled not only by that interview but by turning around and realizing that I wasn't going to get the engineering job I wanted, and I applied for a job that I was extremely overqualified for, and I ended up being a storeman at a CVS, basically. That's where I worked for 2.5 years. I was one of the only males in a team of about 25 people. My job was to be out the back 5 days a week, see what we didn't have much of, order it, unpack it, scan it into the system, and then put it over on the shelves. And that's what I did.
What were those 2 years like for you? Because they must have been insanely thinking about it, going from wanting to be an engineer, you go to school, and then all of a sudden you're working at CVS for 2 years, right? Besides being extremely humbling, I can't imagine it was like the best years of your life either.
So it's important to mention that during this time, I was playing a bunch of video games. So I would say I peaked in my sort of competitive gaming sort of career towards the end of my university, where I won a LAN. Call of Duty 4 was doing that, but actually no, it was just before uni. But during university, I'd been casting as a hobby. Again, I call back to when I said that I was able to understand as a musician how loving the process was an important part of improving. Well, this time steadily but quietly, I was casting, my off nights and doing that. So the reason why I took this job at the CVS was because I was starting to get a couple of opportunities to do sort of small Australian events and casting, and unpaid events or just little ones or whatever. And I realized that I wouldn't really have the time to do this if I was doing an engineering job. It's probably some of the reason why I didn't actually go through with working at this engineering firm. But life was honest work, bro. I'll be honest. It was a low socioeconomic demographic that we served. We're in a pretty rough area, and the premise of this CVS was that it was like off the back of the truck, like warehouse prices. So it was like, oh, there's sale, everything's cheap, going out of business. So people would come in and naturally they just would they wouldn't really respect the people that worked there because it was like a discount warehouse. And, we had to deal with so much shit. And, I spent 2 years just living a pretty strict routine, 9 to 5 working, which honestly did wonders for my physical fitness, because then every day I'd be at the gym for a certain time. I'd come home, go to bed, go to work, and I had a routine. I'd eat the same thing every day. I was, getting rid of I lost all of that weight in uni because I just wasn't eating enough in my last year. But, I was starting to build up a basis for a decent sort of physical fitness level. But I was the guy that they always called on in the store if anything malfunctioned, if like a receipt printer wasn't working, if the computer wasn't working, if something wasn't scanning. Like, oh, Mitch go to university? Oh, yeah. So I was just de facto the Mr. Fix-It. I was also the one that had to kick people out if they were caught stealing. I ended up eventually moving sort of more into the dispensary and assisting the pharmacists because obviously I understood computers. So as a dispensary technician, my job was to dispense medication, do basically everything that a pharmacist would do, but the pharmacist would just have the check to make sure that I did it right, because basically they needed another pair of hands in there because we were filling 600 scripts a day. And essentially for pharmacists, like there is this is documented. There's a certain number of scripts in a day where the risk of error starts to creep in, and that can kill someone, right? So it's like 150 scripts a day for a pharmacist. So there were some days where we had 2 pharmacists and 500 scripts, and it was like, you like, what happens if you have so many scripts to do? The liability is on you as a pharmacist. If you fuck up, you give someone the wrong medication, if you kill someone. So I stepped in there to assist with the dispensing, so that the risk of error would be limited a bit more. But the problem was that this was on request of the pharmacist, who essentially operated as the manager of the store. They were pretty high ranking because they had a degree. Glad that helped. So that it was not something the company would have provided. Basically, so my friend Wilson, who was a pharmacist, was like, either I keep up with, if I keep dispensing scripts at this rate and end up killing someone and lose my job and potentially go to jail, or I tell Mitch to come and help me in dispensary, and then we just sort of run this thing. So I got up in there and, we managed to keep up, but it was absurd. Like, we would have a line out of the door in this store for people getting their medications, because things like cholesterol medication, blood pressure, these are things that just fly off the shelves because so many people need them. And we were a cheap pharmacy. Even the prescriptions were cheap. You know what I mean? Everything was cheap. So everyone would come in. We the thing is, we were just dispensing them fairly cheap generic brands. So there weren't, that was kind of why it was cheap, but people didn't really seem to care. And despite maybe the quality of the tablets sort of not being as good, because I could tell, because I had to crush them sometimes. I could see the difference. Like, it seemed fine. So that was what I did, bro. I just worked, and like I didn't realize it, but 2 things happened. First of all, I'd grown too far away from the engineering industry to really get back in without a lot of study, and especially at my age. And secondly, I was starting to really get somewhere with my casting. And I was starting to work events on the weekend, and in my second year of working at this pharmacy, ESL in Germany, asked me if I could start coming out every few months and doing the finals of their wargaming league, just host the event as a stage host. Eventually, they asked me to come and live there permanently. So that's when I started to make the shift away from Australia.
So, working in pharmaceuticals, you have some stories about like people throwing stuff at you and dealing with that. And was it really rough working there? Did you have a lot of characters come through that were, okay, I'm just going to say, did you have a lot of drug addicts trying to come through there all the time?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, a great example is pseudoephedrine is pretty easy to obtain in a pharmacy, and it is a key component for a drug called ice. So you sort of boil it down. You cook it pretty easily into ephedrine, and then you do some. I don't know the details, but we would have to look at someone's ID, and we'd put it into the system, where this system would tell us if this same ID had been used recently to obtain pseudoephedrine, because it's very common for people to go around to different pharmacies and do it. And there were definitely altercations. Like, some guy'd come in, ID's obviously fake. He tried to give me his phone as collateral, so I gave him some pseudoephedrine. Like, what? And then he loses his temper. And then, okay, shit, I'm the only male in this whole store Now, like, I wasn't small. I definitely started to put on some muscle then, but I wasn't exactly Mr. Olympia. I wasn't Lou Ferrigno in this fucking pharmacy. So, I would have to find a way to get this guy to leave without hurting someone, or or subdue them, or whatever. I had definitely had some incidents where the police had to be called and I had to physically restrain certain people. A lot of people would come in and would be in incredible pain. Some of these people would be in palliative care, where they had cancer and like their body was literally fucking wasting away, and they are there to get their very important pain medication. But one of two things could be true. First, they could have taken too much of it. And like, I would have a warning on my screen from their doctor saying, this person has recently had this drug dispensed to them. Do not dispense a repeat until a week from now. Because if they've come back, it means that they are addicted to it, or whatever. And I have to go and tell them, I can't give you this drug, the only thing that's going to help you sleep. I can't legally give it to them. Like, look, you can take some of this, I offer them some shitty analgesic that doesn't help them, and they're like, no, I need this. I'm like, I'm sorry, I can't give it to you. Like,
did that change the way that you look at people, like that experience? Because it seems like it would almost have to, like, you deal with, because I know working with drug addicts for me helped change my perspective of how I view people, especially when you see people who are just at their like lowest points in life, right? Like, did that change the way that you kind of look and care for other people in the world?
Absolutely. I mean, even the people I worked with, this was not exactly a stepping stone to a bright career in any industry where I worked. A lot of people that I worked with honestly were sort of, 30s, 40s, 50s. They had families. They were trying, they didn't have qualifications, and they were just working. They were just, and what made me feel bad when I left is because I had like survivor's guilt, because I thought to myself, well, I'm going to go do this thing and there's a bright future there. And for you guys, that's not what this is. But, getting alongside people all the time, like we were encouraged to try and sell as much shit as we could. But the vast majority of times I would sit there and listen to a person talk about how they're feeling or what they're experiencing, and try and help them come up with a solution or something that at least can sort of ease their symptoms or whatever. I sold things from skincare to vitamins to sports supplements to, baby formula to, Neosporin type things, all those kinds of things that I sold. And you kind of just had to listen to people a lot. You just had to really just shut up and listen, because you wanted them to be satisfied. Because if they weren't, then like God knows what would go down, especially in the pharmacy. Like, I would have a lot of people come up to me in the pharmacy, and now I didn't have a pharmacology degree, so I only really entertained these consultations with people as far as it was responsible to do so. Yeah. But there were a lot of times where I listened, talk to the pharmacists, or listen to them talk to the patient, and see how they tried to help assist them. I think pharmacists, by the way, are some of the most hardest working people I've ever met. They just get driven into the ground with the sheer workload of trying to keep an ailing and aging population, happy. And you know what? I was one of those people. Or, all these people that would come in the store and all those people that worked there, like, I didn't know that I would necessarily have a career after that. And a part of me has started to realize and understand or believe that maybe this would be as far as I got too. And obviously at 23 or 22, that's kind of hard to admit, but there is definitely a period of time where I was considering giving up on casting, because I don't think it was going anywhere for me. And, it's Australia, the industry is just not, it wasn't there. I mean, I'd founded 2 esports orgs. At that time, I was doing a bunch of extracurricular stuff to keep me busy, but there was definitely a time where I had to face a decision whether to try and keep doing this stuff on the side and using all my time off to go and cast these events, or just, I don't know, just admit that I wasn't going to go any further than this chemist job.
What was the drive then to make the decision? Because you have forced with this option. What was it that made you say, let's keep doing it? Did you set like a time limit, like, okay, we have one more year to get this done. If this doesn't happen, then we're doing something else? Or what did you do with that? Yeah,
well, I think I was being asked, I was getting pressured, to be honest, not too badly, but to step up and be the retail manager of the store I was working at. Mm-hmm. And that would have meant I just wouldn't have the time. Like, a lot of my extra time would have been going into that stuff. Fortunately, I got lucky because I was good mates with, one of the guys who ran esports out at ESL and was doing the water tank stuff. So, like, after I met him, which to be fair was about 3/4 of the way into my stint at this pharmacy. Yeah. So like, there was a lot of time up until that point where I had no idea what was happening. But, he definitely gave me, good feeling about it. He's like, listen, like, we'll keep bringing you over for these events. I did a Gamescom. I was in Poland in the middle of nowhere. Like I got a chance to travel, and I thought to myself, well, like this, it doesn't hurt to do this. I'm getting travel. It's being paid for. The first event I did though, I got paid €100, which for an ESL event, which is just spending money while I was there, because they were like, we don't have the budget to pay you. So I'm like, if you fly me there and get me a hotel and you give me €100 spending money, I'll take it. And that's what they did. And that was still ESL. I was hosting a Smite regional final and a World of Tanks season 2 finals. So, and I got €100. Most people don't know that actually, but that my first professional event, my ESL event, I got paid nothing. They just didn't have the budget. But I was like, fuck, I need to go and do this.
Yeah.
And you know who I met over there? Jason Kaplan, Joe Miller, Rachel Quirico, Paul Challoner, Lee Smith, Lauren Scott, all these, I met Machine over there, and all of a sudden, I had these connections that I just would never have had beforehand. I didn't expect to meet them. So, in the as my work with this pharmacy started to wind up, I was, definitely motivated to keep doing that. And I could definitely see light at the end of the tunnel. But yeah, there was definitely a time where I didn't. And like, I think like many people, I had to face myself with like, can you live with yourself if you end up doing this every day for the next like X amount of years? That average person that you never thought you were, that you thought you were something special, are you ready to become that average person that you look around and used to look down your nose at, and now don't anymore because I was living amongst them as one of them? But
yeah, I
think that is what changed me, is the realization that, I wasn't actually that special at all. And, I had to do some real honest work, and I ate nothing but humble pie for 2.5 years.
Do you think it's maybe finding that moment that you're not special that allows you to become special though? Because that's what I think. Right? Like, I think that you would have probably never gotten this if you would have always been thinking you're the best, then it doesn't allow you room to grow. But at the point where you can say, you know what, I'm not the best, it lets almost infinite room for growth.
If I don't have that realization, then I don't ever become the person that people want to work with or want to bring out to Europe or want to bring out to America. I never become the kind of person that is able to be comfortable being dissatisfied with their level of, performance enough to improve. I would have just been this like really, I don't know, this really messed up individual, this tight ball of poor character with a lot of character flaws and just a jaded, view of the world around me. And I don't think I would ever have grown out of that. And, I would have just been, everyone has that friend that, just never really found what they really wanted to do and never found the desire to get up out of their circumstances. And that it's frightening.
It is
super frightening. And it's given me like a real fear of, it's also kind of a bad thing as well, because it has also made me very aversive to feel mediocrity or feeling, it makes it harder for you to appreciate the simple things in life, I think now, because I was so like, this almost became my norm. Like these simple things that we indulge in and enjoy when we're on holiday.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to go out here and I want to be bored, like I want to let that be a possibility so I can get away from the hustle and bustle. But that was almost my everyday. And that's why it's hard for me to relax and it's hard for me to be satisfied, because the moment I feel like I'm stagnating, I shit myself. And in the past I've tried to make really big or dumb decisions in life to like jumpstart, my progress. A good example, I was in a relationship in Germany. I felt like I was stagnating as a caster, and I thought, I'll just end my relationship and double down on my casting. That'll be a great idea. Terrible idea. Fortunately, she took me back when I realized in like 2 days that I was a fucking moron, and managed to keep going. But it made me frantic in a way that, made me look around for something big in my life to change, so that would somehow open up a path forward when I felt like I was not getting anywhere.
Okay. That's interesting, and I agree with you there. So you get an offer to move over to work with ESL in Germany. What's that like for you? And what's that like for your, like, telling your family, listen, I'm moving to Germany. I'm done with Australia for a while.
Yeah, I think my mother could see that I was struggling a lot, I think, during that time in my life. So there wasn't much pushback from her. I mean, I was already kind of paying board at that age. She was like, listen, you're still living with me. You're 22, 23, like you're going to start contributing. I was like, oh, fair enough. Yeah, no worries. So, when she saw the plane tickets, she saw the contract, she was like, well, have fun. Like she was like, okay, like, she didn't feel bad about it. She was obviously sad that I left, and she misses me much, a lot, and I miss her as well. But I'd only been out of the country once prior to that point, and that was to go to Bali, which is a common Australian family holiday destination. And well, that's not true. So I had traveled for these World of Tanks events, so I had been out of the country, but most of the time I'd been sort of tied up and actually working the events and trying to sleep off the jet lag that I hadn't really experienced what it was like to go abroad. So my mother was fine with it. At that point, during that time, my mother had moved to Adelaide. So we had started living together again because it was, my grandparents were getting older and I couldn't afford to live in my own place. So I was living with my mother and brother who had finished his schooling at this preparatory. So we kind of all moved back together, and there's a little bit of friction to begin with there, as I had to get used to it and sort of maybe didn't feel as I had the same amount of freedom, but we got there. And off I went. I said, like, there is nothing that I'd rather do more than this. This is something that I feel like I'm good at doing. This opportunity is crazy. I could live in a different country. I could actually work full time as a caster and make a living. And it was just the easiest decision I think I've ever made. Wasn't hard. Because it was either that, or I think at the same time I had an offer from ESL's Australian branch to live in Sydney. But the money was poor. We would have been living like 3 to a house. Like it was pretty rough. And it wasn't perfect out in Germany either. I wasn't getting a huge amount of money, but for me it was like more than I really needed. It was, I was doing fine out there.
So looking at working for ESL, you worked for ESL for I think it's 2.5 years, right? Something that was pretty long before you left and joined the Overwatch League. Was that 2.5 years just something that you felt like you were constantly growing? You mentioned stagnating, that you felt like there was times that you were stagnating. What was it like, your journey through ESL?
It's tough for me to piece it out chronologically, but I'll sort of try and do my best. I went over there initially so I was hosting World of Tanks, but as it was happening at the time, Lauren Scott, or Pansy, was moving over to doing more Counter-Strike, and she wasn't freed up to do our Wargaming League show 2 days a week. So that was me. I went over there and I was all of a sudden casting World of Tanks. I was casting with a gentleman by the nickname of Laughter. His name was Oliver Maxfield, who became one of my closest friends. He was a British bloke, and we were quite close, and we were both young bachelors living in Cologne, and we just did some crazy dumb shit out there. I always remember those days of coming into work, sometimes drunk, to be honest. We'd go out with Joe Miller. Joe Miller, would take us, because me, Joe, and Oliver were very close, the three of us. We were always drank together. Sometimes we'd be out there 4 or 5 nights a week at Boogaloo just drinking together. This was just after the LCS had left Cologne and moved to Berlin. Yep. So it was the nightlife was very busy for esports in Cologne during that time, where all the LCS players were there. It had quietened down a little bit at that point. So I would start working Water Tanks, and I worked there honestly for at least a year and a half. And I would come to work and I'd sit in the office, and 2 days a week I'd come in for the show. The other days I would be doing VOD review, or every week on a Friday we had scheduled a couple of hours where me, D-Man, Joe Miller, Kalaris, Machine, Jason Kaplan, Pansy, Momo, Todd, or Johan Merlo, the StarCraft caster, we'd sit in this room, we'd go over some different VODs, and we'd just give feedback. So I was, able to, which is quite insane, really. Joe knew when he sort of agreed, because he was the one that brought me over ultimately. He knew I was a bit of rough around the edges, strong accent, spoke too fast, phrasing was pretty poor. So in my first VOD review, he was very, very thorough, and everyone else in the room was also very thorough. So I sat there fuck me, man, I feel like I've walked into Charles Xavier's Academy for extraordinary individuals, and I thought I was I was a big fish in the small pond of Australia, and now I'm getting some very harsh but very true feedback from a lot of very decorated individuals in esports. Lee and Joe had just come off; they just finished their stint casting the LCS for Riot, so they were very well known, and they were my favorite casters by far. I had to get past being starstruck by them pretty quickly though, because they were like, don't be like that. If you're gonna learn anything here, you just need to get over it. So
that's actually some of the best advice you can give for anyone. I find it so weird working in esports when people get starstruck who work in esports. I'm like, it just feels so weird to me, because because I don't think I ever really had this issue, just because I was like, you're a player, I'm supposed to work with you. My job is to work with you, not get starstruck with you.
Sure.
Like, and that it's a very easy trade. Like for me, I didn't really have that transition. It was like, I'm just working with you. Like that's it.
Yep.
We can't have this. This
it's gonna be easy to
relationship.
make friends if they're not starstruck by me as well. Like, not that this happens all the time. Like, I don't get people that come up to me all the time like that. But when they do, that you've already set the basis of a relationship that's a little bit one-sided or like it's slanted, right? So it's like I won't be able to be your friend if you're starstruck by me. And I realized that was the same for Joe. He's like, you just have to get and Lee was the same. You just have to get past this so we can actually have like an equal relationship, because a relationship in where someone knows tons about you and you know nothing about them, and that's the basis on which that relationship happens. It's like, I'm still trying to find out about you as a person, but you're gushing about these things that like you like about me or whatever. Like it just doesn't make sense. And that's why, like, it's the same for meeting fans as well. It's a fantastic experience, but sometimes I wish that a fan would come up and be like, "Hey, you dickhead, yeah, your hair looks like shit." You know what I mean? Like, actually, like, find, like, subvert this expected sort of way that, and I have that. Australian fans always give me that, which is great, because I'm reminded that every time I go home, I'm brought back to earth. It's like Jesus re-entering Nazareth and almost being chased off a cliff because everyone decides they don't, or where it was, Bethlehem or whatever, because they decide that they don't like him or whatever. So I enjoy humbling experiences now. I've got a taste for them after experiencing for 2.5 years. But so World of Tanks is where it started. That was still happening, and I wanted to do a little bit more stuff on the side. So I asked Joe, look, I want to maybe cast some other games. Well, he said, we've got some for you. So I started casting Battlefield a couple of days a week, and eventually I was casting like 4 days a week. Battlefield 4, not a great esports game. They stripped away all the good things about Battlefield, like the vehicles and the huge maps. They made it 4v4 squad rush, so everyone kind of had the same equipment. It was just like kind of a bad Call of Duty, whereas like a domination style, like search and destroy. It was bad, but a lot of the best Overwatch era players of the early era did come from that game. Like your Too Easies and like all the guys that played on the original Fnatic team actually came from Battlefield. And they were very good. So that was happening. Before I'd got out to Germany, I was casting League of Legends and Counter-Strike, mostly League of Legends. That was actually my main game that I was casting at the time. But ESL hired me as a host initially, and I thought, well, fuck me, I'm just gonna do what I can with these opportunities. And then I was like, well, then I'll weasel my way into the things I actually want to do. Now, this actually turned out to be true. So I was casting League of Legends. They'd have their little tournaments on a Sunday, and they'd just be like free to like go for lol or whatever it's called, and you'd sign up. You get RP if your team won, and people played it to have something to play. So I'd cast that. I just solo cast it a lot of the time, or Jason, I would cast a lot of it with him. And eventually, for League of Legends, I started to get a couple opportunities as well, because I was quite an experienced LoL caster from being in Australia. Even though some elements of me needed to be tidied up, I was still sort of decent. So I casted the IEM Cologne, which was, they called it an IEM, but it was all out of the Cell Studios in Cologne. But I casted that with Frostgirin, actually. She and I casted the games there, and then I think we did a tri-cast in the finals. It was Papa Smithy, me, and Frostgirin. And all of us, after that, I did the IEM Katowice of that year, which I want to say is 2015. 16, I don't know, where I was part of that event as an official caster, because I think for ESL, like, they wanted some of their casters as well. It was a partnership with Riot, so I was casting that event. I think Lee was also casting the event, so the two of us were on the ESL side, and so that's where I got to work with a lot of the Riot people. I got on with them really well. It's where I first met Monty Doa, Quickshot, Crepo, Deficio, all those people. I casted with Deficio. I did a tri-cast with D-Man and Crepo. Did a tri-cast with Monty and Doa. Don't ever do that, by the way, because it's impossible to work your way into that duo. Like, you can't. I was sat on the end of the table like, what the fuck do I even say? Or when do I even say what I want to say? I was kind of like a secondary play-by-play caster at that point, because I was not like an analyst for League of Legends, even though I'd done so much prep for that event. It was disgusting. Pages and pages and pages. Watched all the VODs that I could. And then I ended up doing the semi-final of IEM Katowice with Crepo and Deficio. It was Fnatic versus Raw Never Give Up. And so there was a time there where I was talking to Riot, that there was a very real chance that I would be going to Berlin and be becoming part of the LCS caster team. which is not something I mention all that much because it's kind of feels like a humble brag, but that was where I was trending. So I'd been at ESL and I'd been in this infrastructure, and there was that opportunity coming up. But later that year, BlizzCon happened, and Overwatch came out. Well, Overwatch was announced at least.
Yeah.
So what happened was that I declined casting. There was a chance I'd also go to Korea to Seoul and cast League of Legends as well for OG, and that was those two are both very real because Papa Smithy needed a partner because Monty and Doa were going to go. They had already sort of made it pretty clear that they were going to go to the US and cast the Overwatch League, and I'm like, what about your boy? I'm going to go. So that was a bit further on, but I definitely had a chance to cast League at that level. So what happened was Overwatch sort of came out 6 months before closed beta. Jason and I started working on a little YouTube channel because everyone was like mining the press packs and mining whatever data they could for information on Overwatch. There was tons of hype around the game, but no one was talking about it as an esport. No one was talking about it as an esport. Well, me and Jason immediately could see that there was potential there. So we started a terrible YouTube series. It's called Overdrive. It's just not very good, but it exists. It was a thing that we did. And on that channel, we had eventually we had like a mini series where we just talked about things. We had all of our VODs that me and Jason cast in the closed beta, and after that, interviews with players, highlights of stuff, like recaps of tournaments. We ended up just making this channel. That was what got us closed beta access, which was what ultimately got us into casting the first European tournament, which was, I think, held maybe 5 hours after the first North American tournament because fish sticks and they couldn't help themselves. They had to be first, Americans. But we... because our friend AlphaCast he worked at ESL. AlphaCast is a very popular French streamer, but he ran this tournament. He brought this tournament. He's like, you and Jason want to cast it? We're like, fuck yes. And we were in straight away. We were casting Overwatch from the beginning, but it took a long time for that was always in our off time, like closed beta and all that sort of stuff for Overwatch. So during that period of time, I was casting Counter-Strike, which is also a game I had experience with, and I was a decent, I'd done an FPS in the beginning, and with Call of Duty 4 was where I first started. So I'd casted League of Legends, got to the point where I'd have a shot with Riot, and then kind of, decided not to, and then I stopped casting League, and then I was casting Counter-Strike.
Why didn't you take the opportunities with Riot?
Because I didn't really want to. Honestly, I don't really want to rag on Riot too much, but I wasn't sure that it was the game that I wanted to be a part of. Also, working for Riot didn't really appeal to me. Okay. Joe and Lee didn't really, they because they also chose not to work for Riot and stay with ESL. They were like, listen, you understand.
It was big news when they left.
Yeah, and you gotta understand that we didn't want to, do this full time for a couple of reasons. Lee's reason was because he was in a relationship with someone in Cologne. That was, but they were like, just be careful with this. Maybe this is not what you want to do. And I thought about it a bunch, and I think it was the potential for Overwatch to be something that I was so passionate about Overwatch, just seeing it introduced, because it was a combination of FPS and MOBA, which is the games that I was primarily casting. At that time, I was casting Counter-Strike in League. So I think I declined it because I believed that I had a chance with Overwatch. Way before I really could know for sure, but I was starting to become a very good caster, very well-rounded, technically proficient play-by-play caster, because that was where I gravitated much more to the technical side of the craft. Yeah. And that really helped me shine, I think, over a lot of other casters who were frankly not as driven to do that. They didn't work as hard on really just being very clean, polished, and technically strong. And I wouldn't have got there if it wasn't for the people that were able to teach me and mentor me through that. But yeah, that's why I didn't go to Riot. And also at the time, we weren't hearing good things about conditions for casters at Riot. Yeah. I think things are much better now. And I think they're doing a great production for the LEC. If I ended up at the LEC and was still there, I probably wouldn't be too upset. I'd still be in Berlin. I'd probably be able to speak German probably by now. I would never have had to leave, and it would have been fine. But it wouldn't have been what I was truly passionate about, which was, casting Overwatch, which we wouldn't have made it to that point if we just didn't enjoy doing countless games, observing them ourselves, producing them ourselves, no kill feed, no scoreboard, minimal ultimate indicators, no health bars, all that stuff, right? No hero limit. I love it. I hear Overwatch casters complain about how hard it is nowadays, and I just scoff. I mean, bro, come on, man. Like, this used to be so much worse.
Yeah.
Like, at Hex and ZP were doing the same thing in NA at the same time. No, there was no one else. It was just us. Fish Sticks and Joshy were also dabbling with it as well, but Fish Sticks had to work at Twitch. Like he was sort of busy with that, and Joshy ultimately just didn't cut the mustard with Overwatch casting. But there were not many of us. We were the first because we did it. We did it when there was no compensation for it. At that time, I was casting a bunch of Counter-Strike because this Overwatch stuff had to be done in my own time.
Yeah, because it wasn't paying the bills. The other stuff's paying the bills.
To justify working at ESL, I was casting Counter-Strike, and I was really enjoying it, honestly. Like, I don't think I was a great League or Counter-Strike caster. I don't think I had ever given myself the time to be like a top. I think I was scratching the surface of working my way into the top tiers, both in League and in Counter-Strike, but I wasn't quite there on either one of them. I didn't like the stop and start of Counter-Strike. It made it a little bit hard for the way that I prefer to flow. Mm-hmm. But I was casting the ESL Pro League with Pansy, and we were a good duo. Like, it had everything. It was entertaining. She was extremely knowledgeable, so she got to play by play while also giving a lot of her knowledge, and I was able to tier up for a bunch of stuff, and I could play by play, and it was good. I ended up working Counter-Strike majors as like a sideline reporter. That was how they managed to still get me involved in the show, because I knew a lot. I'm also credited with one of the very few interviews in which Happy from Team Envious smiled. And I got a really great interview out of Kiyoshima after he was dropped from Envy and joined FaZe. And the way I did that was by complimenting his shoes before we started the interview. Like, I really, as an interviewer, I never really wanted to do it, but I always went a little bit further by like, I think much like you do, I think a lot of this interview is evidenced a great deal of research on your part, and that's what I really tried to do with these players. And I try and throw them something they weren't expecting, or but like, try and talk to them as a person. It wasn't just like, hey, Keo, you're just gonna say, I'm gonna ask you this, you're gonna say this, and then we're gonna walk away from each other, and then we're gonna.
I won't lie, that is why I started the show, is because I was tired of seeing interviews like that, and I'm like, these are they're not skilled. Like, I'm sorry if you're a person who does these interviews. I'm sorry, I don't think they're skilled interviews. I think they take minimal amount of effort, and my apologies to you now. I think it is much easier to do that than actually go the extra mile with those interviews. So
I agree. And that's why I like, and Blake, that's why I was sort of happy to be on this show as well, because I think anyone feels much better when they're talking to an interviewer that has obviously done their homework and is asking the right questions. I mean, there's always a right question to ask. But anyway, long story short, that's what I was doing in the lead up to when Overwatch started. So there was the League. I chose not to go to Riot, and in the meantime, doing a bunch of Counter-Strike stuff, which culminated. My final event for ESL was hosting the desk at IEM Sydney, which was normally what Machine would do, but he couldn't. I think he had another. I think he was doing the Dota International. So I got to desk host a huge CS event, and that was a great way to go out. Obviously, I preferred to be a caster, but it was a homecoming. I was in my own home country hosting a huge event, and I couldn't have asked for much more before moving on to Overwatch.
Yeah. So when did you know that you were going to be hired to Overwatch, and what was the process of you kind of getting into Overwatch? Because you said you weren't sure about it when you turned down Riot, when you turned down doing OGN, and there's like inklings that this is going to happen. How do you get that solidified? How do you really get that job?
Well, yeah. So obviously, during the closed beta, I was casting a lot of tournaments. They were weeklies. Like AlphaCast was running weekly tournaments, so there was always stuff for us to cover. We saw the rise of Melty Esports, purely on the basis of them being the only team that had all their members in the closed beta or had extra time to practice. Either way, they were one of the best teams. So we saw a lot of guys come out of the woodwork. Like Taimu, Tvik, Fisher, Artier, Eisfeld. All these European players, because that was mostly what I covered at the time. And eventually, as often happens with ESL, because what ESL was good at doing back then was providing tournaments for developers that didn't have an esports team or the resources to put on a show. Yep. And ESL, ESL always delivered that product. It was like not crazy. It was not amazing because the people working on it didn't always have expertise in that particular game, but it was solid. You got an esports event from ESL, and sometimes it had the bells and whistles, but more often, most of ESL's attention back then was focused on the CS majors and the IEMs. So, but this was a Gamescom, and there was an Overwatch tournament there. Nate Nanzer, who was working obviously on Overwatch esports, said, "Hey, we want to get a NA versus EU tournament going on. We want a tournament where NA can play EU." And I went to ESL. And ESL was like, right, so you want this tournament, you want it at Gamescom, because it was, Overwatch hadn't been out for very long. People were still lining up to play it, the new heroes and stuff like that. It was still very much like super hyped up. And so ESL was like, okay, well, we'll do it. So there was a stage at Gamescom where an Overwatch tournament occurred. It was, who was working? So I was casting with Jason. D-Man was casting the event as well. Zoe was there as the desk host. I hosted for her on the last day. Huck was on the desk. Fish Sticks was on the desk. I'm trying to think if there was any more people casting. That sounds better. Yeah, Fish Sticks and Huck were casting together, actually, some of the games. And so that was the first, not the first Overwatch tournament, because it was like an Agents Rising tournament, and then we had like the takeover tournaments in Krefeld as well. But this is the first sanctioned one that Blizzard were actively involved in. Blizzard people were present. Nate and Kiki and everyone were there. And I had a really good event. I cast the final, and that was the put your damn headset back on, son, you got a game to play tournament. And I had that line, and afterwards, I was approached by sort of Kiki and Nate, and they said, look, we think you did a really good job. Like, we hope to still use you for a bunch more events. And I said, well, I'd love that. That'd be great. So nothing was solidified then. The next event was was the Overwatch Open, the E-League one. And they wouldn't use me because I work for ESL. Like, working for ESL meant that E-League and MLG refused to hire me for these Overwatch events, and I couldn't do dick about it. So I started to freak out. And I was like, how many more Overwatch events are ESL even going to do? And how many am I going to miss out on? Because they're just going to get like Hex and ZP to cast all their... I mean, E-League had Semler and Anders. I think Anders was casting Overwatch. Mr. X was also there as well. It was his first one, who I just thought was a scrub at the time, because Matt didn't really know anything about the game at all. He was just asked to do it because he was fucking based in the US. But that's fine. That's that saltiness from like a quote unquote OG, right? You expect.
Yeah.
So I was a little bit concerned. I ended up doing a DreamHack, but I missed out on MLG Vegas, which looked like an awesome event, because fucking Adam Apicella wouldn't hire my ass because I work for ESL. And I started to think to myself, despite the fact that working at ESL in the past has given me these opportunities and has allowed me to develop as a caster, I can't shake the feeling that now this association or working for them is starting to impact my ability to get these gigs. And I knew for a fact that the relationship between Blizzard and ESL, as far as Overwatch was going, wasn't overly harmonious. Yeah. And there wouldn't be much more going on, especially after IEM Gyeonggi, which was an event that was riddled with a lot of difficulties, not only from the cooperation between ESL and OGN to run the event, but also with Blizzard. So I'm like, I'm fucked. Like if I stay here, but like I can't, like MLG's not going to hire me. Like that's not going to happen. But the World Cup was that year, and the casting pairs were myself and D-Man, and ZP and Mr. X.
Yeah,
those are the casting pairs. Jason Kaplan was a sideline interviewer. The desk consisted of I'm going to say it's Golden Boy, Zoe, Reinforce, Flame. I think Flame was involved at that time. I think he was. This was 2016. So this was the World Cup that had like an opening week of matches, and then like it was very grandiose. We got paid a bunch for it. It was a ton of days of work. It was like they were going hard in the paint for this event, which, there were teams with like poke lols on them. Canada had poke lols, and like the USA just didn't have a great team. Sweden had. It was just weird. But it was at that event that Riot were also courting me, and to come to League of Legends for them. And I said to Nate, I said, listen, like, I just want you to understand, like, you told me that you wanted me to be a part of sort of Overwatch and stuff like that, and in the future, but I was shitting myself because I'm like, yeah, but working for ESL might mean that I don't get these gigs anymore. And then Riot's coming to me. I'm thinking, wait a minute, like there's something that's kind of guaranteed there. But Nate, in typical Nate style, Nate loves to flex. He just said to me, look, whatever they're offering you, I will beat it. I said, for what? He's like, I would like you to come and be a part of the league next year. So yeah, I was like, well, that alleviates a lot of my stress. But it would still be another year before I even got to the States. Yeah. But soon after that, I left ESL. So I sat in Germany for about 4 months with no work, sleeping on an NA schedule because I was casting a bunch of ZP and Hex. doing their like monthly melees and stuff. So
Yeah.
it was bizarre. I was in a country whose language I did not speak, sleeping from sort of 7 a.m. to 5 p.m., waiting to get out of there. And look, Cologne is a place that I loved very much, but there wasn't much left for me. I'd ended my relationship. I was no longer at ESL, so I wasn't getting paid either. And I was just waiting for the next thing. So that was just a really brutal holding pattern that I was in for quite some time, and it definitely affected my mental health a lot. Just trying to stay positive and wait for my chance. But eventually it came. I did find out that I would not be casting with Jason, which I believe to him was quite a blow, and for me also was wildly inconvenient. But we had a feeling because we'd cast the DreamHack that year, and they had paired me with Matt a fair bit. They'd paired me with everyone. I cast with Jason, I cast with Hex, but they paired me with Matt quite a lot. They were starting to get Mr. X involved, and I was like, well, okay, as long as he can prove that he actually knows what he's talking about and isn't just some guy coming from COD and just smelling like the cash and you know, because when I first met him, I didn't really have like that high an opinion of him until I got to know him. But he did really well in that event, and he demonstrated that not only was he interested in understanding the game, he had a very good aptitude for identifying trends, and he had a lot of what you really want as an analyst. And we talked, and he had done a very good job of like working around me and supporting me during our broadcasts. That even though Jason was there at the event, watching this happen, seeing me get paired with this caster, freaking out, realizing that maybe his chance at Overwatch League wasn't going to be nearly as real as he thought, and he had to sort of see this. So I can imagine that was kind of tough for them, and I tried to talk with him through a lot of it, but at the end of the day, there's only so much you can say.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to ask, does that put you at a really awkward and hard spot?
Yeah, because I'd had survivor's guilt, quote unquote, before leaving the CVS. This one was a little different though, and I think I think Jason resented me a lot. Because I was able to go and he wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe in a way, maybe I think he was hoping that I'd stayed, or whatever. But and he's doing. By the way, he's doing fine now. It's not like I'm the survivor. Jason's got a bunch of work. He was just out here in LA, working the ESL Pro League.
Yep.
So like he's doing just fine. But I know he definitely hit him very hard that he missed out on the opportunity to cast the Overwatch League, and there wasn't anything I could say to him. The circumstances surrounding him not getting picked up aren't really mine to share.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, it didn't happen for him, and then I had to start again the new casting pair and feel that survivor's guilt, leave another country, and leave people behind once more.
What was it like when you first came to LA then? When you first moved out to LA and you were situated out there?
So when I first arrived in the US, I was actually in Colorado for a week because I was helping out with the tail end of the Contender Season 0 on the desk. So I was, because they just wanted to get me out there anyway. So I flew in through Colorado with my computer in like a huge box and, like monitor. I brought everything. Figuring out how to like ship things from Germany to the US is god awful.
Dude,
so I had a lot
figuring
of
out
stuff.
How to ship stuff in the United States is god awful.
No, I figured out how to ship a PC. Like I used this huge box and I like padded it with bits of ripped up mattress. Like that's how foam mattress. That's how I did it. So Colorado owns, by the way. Like Denver is so good. I was like, but I was also like, the breeze, everything tasted different. The breeze blew through my hair as I walked through Colorado in a new start in life. You know what I mean? Like it was a lot of excitement about that because I was, I'd had a corporate apartment sorted out. Thanks Blizzard, or thanks Nate actually. So when I got to LA, I'd have a place to stay until I managed to find, an apartment. I'd have a month.
Yeah.
So I was like, man, I've gotten free of this old life and those stresses that came with it. Like Germany is a great place. I have so many fond memories, but I also have many not so fond memories. I struggled personally with my mental health and a lot being over there because it was incredibly isolating. Yeah. I drank far too much. I was not healthy, and these had ramifications on how I felt as a person. So again, it was another fresh start, just like when I'd come to Adelaide, another chance to reinvent myself in a way. But this time I was doing it as a professional and people that wanted to pay me to cast Overwatch. So I was in, I think the moment I truly realized that I'd arrived in the United States and that I was on a new start in life is when I jumped out of a plane in Boulder, and I went skydiving. I don't know why I did it. I wouldn't normally do it, but I just, I was I was like, oh wow, old Mitch wouldn't do this, but it's not old Mitch anymore. Like, we're out here and this is a new life, and I did it. So me, Bren Puckett, and Jason Kaplan jumped out of a damn plane, and coming down, seeing the landscape around me, I got a bit emotional, and I realized that this is the country where I was going to be now, and this is the kind of life, and one that I hoped would include many such leaps of faith, because I think those are where the greatest opportunities for personal growth.
Yeah.
So getting to LA was great. I had a corporate apartment in Burbank. I was sort of well set up. I already had a couple of friends here because I'd met Dennis, a couple of years ago through Overwatch, and John as well, a mutual friend of ours there. So, I got settled here. I had my PC set up, my corporate apartment. All of a sudden, I hit the ground running. I'm getting my social security number, bank account set up, looking at getting an apartment. This complex I live in now was the one that I ended up in a couple years ago. We're just in it. We've upsized a bit because Ashley didn't want to live in my bachelor pad with me, and that's fair enough. So, now I'm here, out here in Glendale. So everything was so new, and I was, I didn't really know what to expect from the Overwatch League. I knew it would be hard work, but that first year turned out it was challenging. We worked quite a lot. There's 3 days a week. We only had the pairs that we had working on it, right? We didn't have Wolf and Seth at the time.
Yeah.
But it was just the feeling of having another new start after, again, living in Germany and having the ups and downs was incredibly powerful.
Mm-hmm. Looking at moving into season 3, right? As you're going through, I'm assuming going to be more travel. Is it something you're excited about, or is it something you're worried about, or is it both? Is it just another leap of faith for you? Assuming you're still going to be working with Overwatch League for season 3, because if you're not, then this got really fucking awkward.
No, it's fine. I can say that I haven't signed a contract for season 3 yet. Okay. That doesn't mean that I won't be working it, but I think that a lot of casters in the industry across multiple games are at the point where they're thinking, all right, is this where we want to commit to another year of this? Do we want to be a part of this sort of localization? At this stage, I'm planning to be a part of Overwatch League next year in season 3. So we'll see how it goes. I think we have to we go back and forth. We must negotiate on these things because budgets change or expectations for casters change, and media rights is also a big part of it. Like, are we getting a bunch of money for media rights, and does that factor in? And is there a chance of me getting a raise? Maybe not. But if it happens, which I hope it does, I think the novelty of the travel will wear off pretty quickly. But
I've done traveling for work. It's awful. Everyone's like, oh, and I'm so worried about teams and players. I am terrified for players next year. But also casters, if you're traveling, that's going to probably get boring very quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will have time off though. It'll be I think, as far as I understand, I won't be traveling every week. So there will be weeks where I'm just not casting at all, or maybe I'm casting from LA or not traveling. I don't know. We're still on early drafts of schedules because it's really complicated allocating all the casters to places and looking at the costs of that. And I just don't envy the people that have to do it. I just ask them to send me their latest draft so I have an idea. But yeah, so I'm excited for the experience of home markets because I think the home stands have demonstrated that there's a lot of potential there.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, the novelty of home stands will wear off eventually because they're all going to be home stands, just as the novelty of traveling for work is going to very quickly dissipate.
Yes.
So we have to see if these local markets have legs and their teams are still going to get pushed. I know Washington's hosting a bunch of homestands. 5 homestands, but also their team might not be garbage. With Ellie Vogt and Lozic on the team, this might actually be pretty poggers. So I'm looking forward to it because this is the whole reason why we did this in the first place.
Yeah.
I mean, this was... Now, I love Nate. When he was commissioner of the league, he definitely sold a very grand vision for the league, one that, as we're starting to realize now, is maybe not really as realistic in the short term as maybe he had intimated. But this was part of the vision. The teams would have, and bro, man, we got so many doubters. We had so many detractors in the beginning that all I want is to see this succeed, because we've worked so hard for it. So I think season 3 is the realization of the core vision of the Overwatch League, whether there are Lamborghinis and models or not. I think that this is where we wanted to get to. So as someone who sort of not only helped build up the Overwatch League, but, and this is not, I'm not trying to pump myself up, but I really built the scene a lot. I was there in the closed beta. I was there in the early days of open release, and especially working with the European scene and a lot of the players. My DNA is all over this. Yeah. It is a part of who I am, and being a part of it now, and we realize kind of the vision that we all got on board with in the first place is really important.
Kind of looking at Overwatch, you've been involved with it since the very beginning. Do you ever see yourself casting other games, or are you one of those people who's going to live and die by Overwatch as long as you possibly can?
I think it's really unhelpful for, like, if you want to undertake learning as a lifelong endeavor, right, or self-improvement, it's very unhelpful to go, I'm going to stick with this game and just do it. I love being a good Overwatch caster. I just really want to be the best caster that I can be. I've seen a lot of casters that have risen and have fallen with the titles that they've attached themselves to.
Yeah,
I've developed a skill set in Overwatch now after having cast 7 different titles as a play-by-play commentator that I hope that can make me, adaptable enough to new games if they come out. While I'm not sitting here saying that I plan to go elsewhere next year, I want to leave that opportunity open because I don't want to stagnate. I can't let that happen. And do I think that there's improvement left for me in Overwatch? Sure. But I also think that, something I want to do is be able to grow my brand a little bit. And I think that the growth of my brand is constrained to Overwatch League's brand. Yeah. And frankly, I think I'm pretty close to the ceiling of that right now. Maybe Overwatch 2 brings in a new influx of people into the scene, but there are Rainbow Six casters out there that've managed to get 250,000 followers. Yeah. I have gained maybe and the only reason I talk about these numbers is because my following it informs my salary.
It does.
When I go to negotiations and I ask for a certain amount of money, they will look at my social media footprint and decide whether that's a reasonable amount of money. Now, that's a shame because we just had a long conversation about our own merits being what gained us the money. But look, being a good caster gets me a seat at the table, but having a strong reach and strong influence, even if I'm an asshole, will actually be what fills my pockets. So, without being greedy, I definitely want to have I want to, down the track, I want to get a house and kids and have all those kind of things. I need to think about, continuing to grow my brand in such a way that I can continue to be an attractive prospect for advertisers, for brands, and for game developers alike. And can I, how much more do I grow with Overwatch? Is not only as a caster, but as a brand is a question I have to ask myself. Maybe next year, if I am part of the Overwatch League, I try and work on stuff on the side. Maybe I go non-exclusive and try and work other events, because with respect to these individuals, but if I'm getting overtaken in Twitter followers by Brennan Sideshow, it's pretty clear to see just how important your brand is, and perhaps just how much your brand supersedes the quality or the technical polish of your work. And I'll stand by that one. I say it to their faces all the time, but I'm not trying to disparage those two because they also work very hard. But you can't tell me that I have been focusing on technical ability and polish, and Bren has also. I think that we've been focusing on different things, and I think that there's merit in saying that I may have been better served by trying to fuck around a bit more this year and develop a more entertaining product. But I'm a caster. It's not about me. When I cast, it's not about trying to get attention on me. The farthest I'll go is wear some dumb shirt. But I don't really have the space, in a cast to develop my brand. That's not the point. In fact, it's self-indulgent. And if any caster does that, I'm going to fucking mute them so fast. On the desk is a bit different, right? You're feeling a bit, you're doing bits. So, these are things that I think about all the time going into next year. So to answer your question, finally, no, I would like to think that in the future there are other opportunities and other games to cast. I'll always love Overwatch, and I will stay in Overwatch for as long as it makes sense financially, in terms of how it restricts me or how it maybe doesn't. But I'm absolutely not going to unequivocally stay with this game.
Yeah. I think that's good. I think that's probably a smart business move. That's that thinking ahead, and I think that's a good thing. So
this is a 5-head moment out here. Don't worry.
5 heads. So believe it or not, I only have one more question for you. It's been a ride. I had a ton of fun. I don't know if you had fun. If you didn't have fun, I don't give a fuck.
It's been great. Listen, right? Casters don't talk about themselves very much. We talk about other people and we're storytellers, but I don't mind telling my own every now and then, especially to someone who, has the right way of trying to tease it out of me. So
I greatly appreciate you being on the show. It's been a ton of fun. My last question for you, having had the experience being on the show, this is arguably the hardest question that I will ask you. Having had the experience being on the show, if you could see anyone be on the show, the only criteria is they have to speak English because it's the only language I speak, and they have to be involved in kind of like online media, either YouTube, Twitch, esports, in some aspect. Who would you like to see on the show? And if you pick someone who I've had, I'll let you know.
Okay. I would really like it if you could bring on Tasmo from the Dallas Fuel.
I think that's a good choice.
I think Matt has a really long history in esports and does a lot of work with that team. And I think that, I don't know why, but no one really looks to him for insight. But he was there through all the ups and downs of Dallas so far and will stay that way. And he's a close friend of mine. And has always been on hand with great advice. And, I don't see him as much as I would like to, but that's a mind of esports that has a heck of a lot of experience. And, people just don't often ask him the right questions, but I guarantee you there's a trove of information right there.
Awesome. I like that. Thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate it. If you want to do any shout outs, you're more than welcome to have them now. I don't normally give them, but if you want them, you got them.
Oh, I mean, not particularly. I mean, I guess just shout out to all the crew at Overwatch League. Thank you for keeping me sharp and for motivating me to stay on top and still in grand finals away from all you nerds. Get wrecked.
Well, everyone out there, I hope you've enjoyed the show. My name is Blake Panashevitz. This has been the Minds of Media. And until next time, I hope you all have a wonderful day.